Hey everyone. Welcome back to The Fiction World. Get ready for an amazing tale. Izuku got transported to DxD as fallen angel king and conquered breeding harem with Raynare, Rias and all factions. Smash that like button and subscribe for more. Here we go. Chapter 1, The King Without a Kingdom. The alley smelled like rain and something burning. Izuku hit the ground hard enough to crack the pavement beneath him, both hands catching his weight before his face could meet the concrete. For a moment he just stayed there, fingers spread against wet stone, breathing in shallow pulls while his brain tried to catch up with the rest of him. His ears were ringing. His costume was shredded at the shoulder. The green lightning that had been crackling across his skin since the fight with the vestige was gone, replaced by a deep, bone-level silence that he hadn't felt since before he was 4 years old. He pushed himself upright slowly, the way you do when you're not entirely sure everything still works. The city around him was wrong. Not wrong like destroyed, wrong like different. The street signs were in Japanese, which made sense, but the intersection 3 meters to his left wasn't any intersection he'd ever run, and the skyline behind the apartment blocks had the wrong silhouette entirely. He'd been to Mizudafu 1,000 times. He'd been to UA, to Kamino Ward, to Tartarus. He knew what the sky looked like over every one of those places. This wasn't any of them. He stood in the alley for 30 seconds, cataloging. Wet ground, yellow streetlights, the distant sound of a train. A convenience store on the corner with a logo he almost recognized. A church steeple 3 blocks east. His phone was dead, not low battery, but dead, the screen dark and unresponsive in a way that suggested the hardware had given up entirely. "Okay," he said quietly. Just to hear his own voice. "Okay." One for all was gone. He'd known that before he hit the ground. The absence was enormous, the way a missing tooth is enormous, your tongue keeps finding the gap even when your brain has moved on. He pressed his right hand against his sternum and felt nothing but his own heartbeat. Clean. Ordinary. Just Izuku Midoriya, 17 years old, standing in an alley in a city he didn't recognize without the most powerful quirk in human history. He picked up his phone anyway, tucked it in his pocket, and started walking. The smart move was information. Find out where he was. Find out when he was. Find out what happened to the corridor between him and the vestige's last attack and figure out if there was any way back. He'd faced worse problems than being lost. He'd faced problems that were actively trying to kill him, which was arguably a more immediate concern. The thought had barely finished forming when the feathers hit the streetlight above his head. They fell in a loose scatter, black and iridescent, drifting down through the yellow light like something out of a dream. Izuku stopped walking and looked up. There were 3 of them up there, on the rooftop edge and the fire escape and the corner of the building across the street. He could see the wings before he could make out the faces, massive, dark things that caught the light wrong, like they were made of a material that existed slightly outside the normal color spectrum. The figures they were attached to were humanoid, dressed in dark tactical clothing, watching him with the particular stillness of people who were very good at what they did and knew it. One of them dropped to the ground 10 meters ahead of him, landing in a crouch that she came out of smoothly, standing to her full height with a kind of practiced elegance that was clearly supposed to be intimidating. She was beautiful, which Izuku registered the way he registered any variable in a situation, clinically, filed away, not allowed to become a distraction. Sharp features, long dark hair, eyes that were a shade of violet he'd never seen on a human being. She was wearing close-fitted tactical gear and smiling at him with the particular warmth of someone who wants you to feel comfortable right before something unpleasant happens. "A human," she said, and there was genuine amusement in her voice. "Out here at this hour. You must be either very brave or very stupid." "I get that a lot," Izuku said. "What are you?" The smile faltered, just slightly. She'd been expecting fear, or at least the pretense of calm, the kind of performance a normal person puts on when they're terrified. What she got was a 17-year-old in a shredded costume tilting his head like he was taking notes. "I'm asking the questions," she said, recovering smoothly. "This is cool." Our territory. You wandered in at a very inconvenient time, little human. Your territory, Izuku repeated. Who's your leadership structure? Who do you report to? One of the others laughed from the fire escape, a male voice, sharp with contempt. The woman in front of him studied Izuku for a moment longer, and something behind her eyes shifted, reassessing. My name is Raynare, she said, and the light in her hand gathered itself into a spear without any visible effort, just there suddenly, humming with a pale violet glow. And I'm afraid this conversation is over. She threw it. Izuku moved left without thinking, the instinct so deeply written into his muscle memory that it didn't require conscious input, and the spear punched through the air where his head had been and detonated against the building wall in a burst of crackling light. Plaster and brick dust rained down. He was already moving, putting the dumpster to his right between him and her line of sight, calculating the angles. No quirk. No one for all. His body was strong from years of brutal training, stronger than any normal person his age, but without the lightning in his veins he was working with human limits, and these things, whatever they were very clearly not human. Wings. Spears made of light. Calling this their territory. His brain was pulling at threads. Supernatural. Organized. Territorial. Not immediately hostile in the lethal sense or she'd have aimed centermass. They want something. What do they want from a random human in an alley? The second one dropped from the fire escape, male, heavy-set, with wings that were a darker black than Raynare's, and landed between Izuku and the street exit. The third was still on the roof, which meant elevation advantage but also distance. 3 targets. One was the decision-maker. The others were muscle. Raynare walked toward the dumpster slowly, not rushing, the light already gathering in her palm again. You're fast, she said. For a human. Most people just freeze. Most people haven't trained the way I have, Izuku said from behind the dumpster. He wasn't hiding, he was thinking. Can I ask you something? She stopped. What? What would it take for this to not end with me dead? There was a pause. He heard her exhale, a short, surprised sound, almost a laugh. You're negotiating. I'm gathering information. He stepped out from behind the dumpster slowly, hands visible, and faced her directly. You said this is your territory. That implies governance. Structure. Which means there's someone above you who'd want to know about anything unusual their subordinates encountered. I'd argue a human who dodged a light spear at point-blank range qualifies as unusual. Raynare looked at him for a long moment. The light in her hand didn't disappear, but it stopped growing. You're either the most interesting thing I've encountered this month, she said slowly, or you have some kind of death wish. I've been told those aren't mutually exclusive. He held her gaze. I'm not from here. I don't mean this city, I mean this world. I don't know what you are. I don't know the rules here. But I'm not a threat to your territory, and I'm guessing your leadership would rather know about me before deciding what to do with me than have you make that call unilaterally. Am I wrong? The male behind him made a derisive sound. Just kill him, Raynare. He's stalling. Shut up, Donasek, she said, without looking away from Izuku. The silence stretched. A train sound rolled through it, distant and ordinary. Rain started again, light and cold, spattering the broken plaster dust on the ground between them. Raynare extinguished the light spear. It didn't go out the way a flashlight does, it collapsed, pulled back into her like she was recalling it, disciplined and controlled. She tilted her head, and for the first time her expression was something other than performed amusement. There was a sharpness there. Genuine interest. Not from this world, she repeated. That's a very specific claim. I know how it sounds. It sounds insane. She folded her arms. But Donasek is right about one thing. You're stalling. Her eyes moved across his torn costume, his hands, his posture. What happened to you? Before the alley. You came down hard, I felt the impact from 2 streets over. I was in a fight. Dimensional corridor. Something went wrong. He kept his voice even. I don't know exactly what I am here yet. But I know I'm not going home the same way I came in. Something moved in her face. Quickly, but he caught it, recognition, maybe, or something adjacent to it. She glanced at the male on the roof, then back to Izuku. What's your name? Midoriya Izuku. Midoriya. She said it slowly, like she was testing its weight. Come with me. Donasek made a noise of outrage. Raynare, I said come with me. She was looking at Izuku when she said it, but the authority was aimed at both of them. Lord Azazel will want to see this. She turned and walked, expecting him to follow. Izuku looked at Donasek, who was staring at him with undisguised hostility, and then at the rooftop where the 3rd member of the patrol was still watching. He considered his options for approximately 1 second. Then he followed her. The building she took him to looked like an abandoned textile warehouse from the outside, which was almost certainly intentional. Inside, it was something else. The space had been converted with the kind of money that doesn't care about being obvious: high ceilings with modern lighting rigs, workstations arranged in tight clusters, screens displaying data that scrolled faster than Izuku could read. There were maybe 15 people in there, some with wings folded tight against their backs, others who looked entirely human but moved with the same particular precision Raynare had. A woman at a central console looked up when they came in and said, Raynare. You're early. Where's the rest of your patrol? Following in 5. I need a secure channel to Azazel. She said it without breaking stride, pulling off her jacket and tossing it over a chair. Now. He's in the middle of, I know where he is. Get me the channel. The woman looked at Izuku, then back at Raynare, then opened the channel without another word. Izuku stood in the middle of the room and did what he did best, looked at everything. The screens, the equipment, the body language of the people around him. Some of them were curious. A few were hostile in a quiet, watchful way. One younger-looking operative in the corner was openly staring at him with something that looked almost like scientific fascination, which Izuku found more comfortable than hostility because it was at least a familiar energy. You're not frightened, said a voice from behind him. He turned. The young operative had approached while his attention was on the screens, deliberately, he suspected, using the misdirection intentionally. She was maybe 19 with light hair and wings that were smaller than Raynare's, clearly less senior. Should I be? He asked. Most humans brought in by patrol teams are either screaming or catatonic by this point. She studied him with open curiosity. You're just, looking at things. Information helps, Izuku said. What's your name? Middled. She said it like she was deciding whether to give it. What are you? Human. Approximately. He paused. What does approximately mean in this context? What counts as non-human here? She blinked. You're asking me to explain the supernatural world to you. Starting with taxonomy, yes. I'll build up from there. Middled stared at him for a moment and then made a sound that was suspiciously close to a laugh. Angels, fallen angels, devils, humans. That's the basic breakdown. We're fallen angels. She hesitated, and something flickered in her expression, supposed to be human. But you feel weird. Weird how? Like. She searched for words. Like standing next to a power line. You're not doing anything. But there's a sound. Izuku filed that away. Is that normal for humans? Not even slightly. Raynare's voice cut across the room. Midoriya. She was standing at a workstation where a screen showed a video feed, a man leaning back in an obviously expensive chair, talking to someone off-screen with the comfortable authority of someone who was used to being the most interesting person in any room. He had dark hair and the kind of face that looked like it had made a lot of excellent bad decisions and enjoyed every one of them. Izuku crossed the room and stood where the screen could see him. The man, Azazel, he understood, stopped talking to whoever was off-screen and focused. The quality of his attention sharpened immediately, the way a researcher's does when the experiment produces an unexpected result. "Raynare," he said. "This is the reason you pulled me out of a meeting with Shemhazai." "Look at him," she said. A pause. "I am looking at him. He looks like a teenager in a torn costume." "Look at him." Another pause, longer. Azazel leaned forward. On the screen, Izuku could see him squinting slightly, the casual posture falling away, replaced by something focused and intent. Azazel said. "Yes," said Raynare. "That's." He trailed off, which seemed like an unusual thing for this particular person to do. "That's not possible." And yet. Azazel looked directly at the camera, which meant he was looking directly at Izuku, and said, "What's your name, kid?" "Midoriya Izuku." "Where are you from?" "A different world. Parallel dimension, I think. There was a fight, a disruption in some kind of dimensional barrier, and I ended up here. My phone's dead, my power's gone silent, and I've been awake for about 26 hours. He kept his voice factual. "I'm not a threat. I don't have any resources or affiliations in this world. I'm telling you this because Raynare made the correct call bringing me to a leadership figure rather than making a unilateral decision, and I'd like to continue operating on a good faith basis." Azazel stared at him. Then he laughed, a real one, surprised out of him, genuine and a little delighted. "Good faith basis," he repeated. "Kid, do you know who I am?" "No. I know your name. I know you're the leadership Raynare reports to. I know this organization is called the Grigori based on that logo on the screens. That's the extent of it." Izuku held his gaze through the camera. "Should I be more afraid of you than I currently am?" "Probably," Azazel said. "But it wouldn't help you and it would bore me." He looked at Raynare. "Bring him to Kyoto. Tonight." "Tonight, Azazel, it's almost midnight, then you'd better get moving." The screen went dark. Raynare stood very still for a moment. Then she turned and looked at Izuku with an expression he was starting to recognize, the particular look of someone recalibrating their understanding of a situation that has become significantly more complicated than expected. "Congratulations," she said flatly. "You're the first human he's been interested in since Barakiel's daughter. Is that good?" "I have absolutely no idea," she said, and went to get her jacket. They traveled by air, which was a sentence Izuku would have previously placed in the category of things that require a quirk and now had to file under apparently just things that happen. Raynare carried him, which was undignified, and she clearly knew it was undignified and found his discomfort mildly entertaining. Her arms were stronger than they looked. The cold air at altitude was sharp and clean, and the lights of Kuo spread below them in a pattern he tried to map and file away for later use. Donasek had stayed behind, some quiet argument with Raynare that Izuku hadn't been meant to hear and had heard fragments of anyway, and it was just the two of them, moving northwest through the dark. "What did middle mean?" he said over the wind, when she said "I feel like a power line." "She means you're putting out an energy signature that doesn't match your physical output." Raynare kept her eyes forward. "Humans have ambient sacred energy, it's very faint. Background noise, basically. You're not faint. You're loud. I shouldn't be. My quirk, my power is gone. I can feel the absence." "What kind of power?" "Stored kinetic energy. Physical amplification. Could move at speeds that caused lightning strikes. It's not there anymore." He paused. "But apparently something else is." She glanced down at him, briefly. "When you walked into that alley, I almost didn't throw the spear." "Why?" "A beat. You didn't feel like prey." Izuku thought about that. The wind shifted, colder, and the lights below thinned as they moved out of the urban center into darker, older terrain. "Raynare," he said. "Why did you fall?" She was quiet for long enough that he thought she wasn't going to answer. Below them, a forest passed, black and silver under the partial moon. That's not a question humans usually have the nerve to ask a fallen angel. Her voice was flat, but not cold. There was something under it, something that had been living in a drawer for a long time. "I'm not usually a human in a world with fallen angels," he said. "You don't have to answer." Another silence. "I don't remember," she said finally. "Which is the worst version of the answer?" "I know I fell. I know it was a desire. I don't know exactly what I wanted badly enough to lose heaven over it." A pause. "I've stopped trying to figure it out." Izuku didn't say he was sorry. She wouldn't have wanted that. Instead he said, "Does it still hurt?" "Like a bone that healed wrong," she said. He understood that. More than she could know. The Grigori's primary research facility outside Kyoto was built into a mountain in a way that managed to look both ancient and hypermodern, the architecture moving fluidly between carved stone passages and glass and steel research wings. They landed on a terrace and a security team met them, not hostile, just thorough, and then they were moving inside through corridors lit with the warm glow of technology that was slightly ahead of anything Izuku had seen in his world. Azazel was waiting in a room that looked like a library had been crossed with a laboratory and neither had survived entirely intact. Books in a dozen languages covered 3 walls. The 4th wall was entirely screens and data. He was standing at a workbench in the middle, eating takeout noodles with one hand and scrolling through something on a tablet with the other, and he looked up when Izuku came in with the expression of a person who has been looking forward to something and is pleased it's finally arrived. "Midoriya Izuku," he said. "Sit down. You want noodles?" "Yes, actually," Izuku said. He hadn't eaten in over a day. Azazel gestured at the container on the bench. Izuku sat on a stool and ate. Raynare stood near the door with her arms crossed, which seemed to be her default position. "Tell me about your world," Azazel said, sitting across from him. "Not all of it. The relevant parts. What was your power?" "It's called One for All. It's a transferable stockpiled energy, generations of users built up the reserves and passed it down. It amplified my physical abilities beyond any natural limit. Speed, strength, the ability to redirect force." Izuku kept his voice even. "The current manifestation created green lightning when I pushed the limit." Azazel's chopstick stopped moving. "Green lightning." "Yes." He set down the chopsticks entirely. "And when Raynare's patrol detected you, you were emitting energy consistent with," he picked up the tablet, checked something, 12 distinct lines of sacred energy radiating from a single point source. He looked up. "Not divine energy. Not demonic. Sacred. Distinct from both. I don't know what that means in your framework." "It means," Azazel said, standing up and moving to one of the book walls with sudden purpose, "that you came through that dimensional tear carrying a resonance that I have only ever seen described in one place." He pulled a book from the shelf. It was old, dark leather, wrapped in something that looked like wire to hold it closed. He set it on the bench and unwound the wire with careful hands. "Do you know what a lineage mark is?" "No. In our world, certain powers don't belong to individuals. They belong to lines. Bloodlines that carry a specific resonance across generations, sometimes dormant for centuries, waiting for the right combination of circumstances to activate." He opened the book. The pages were dense with script in multiple languages, interspersed with diagrams that looked like they sat at the intersection of sacred geometry and circuit diagrams. "The fallen hierarchy has lost several of its original cadre. Not to death, to dissolution. The line doesn't die. It disperses. Spreads thin across dimensional boundaries, waiting." He found the page he wanted and turned the book so Izuku could see it. At the center of the page was a diagram, wings, 12 of them, radiating from a central figure, and running through the wings were lines that, even rendered in ink several centuries old, looked unmistakably like lightning. Izuku's throat went dry. "The king of the eighth circle," Azazel said quietly. "The oldest of the original fallen cadre. Not a villain, not in the sense of malice. But a being of such immense will that heaven itself couldn't contain what he wanted. He didn't just fall. He dispersed his essence voluntarily, scattered it across dimensions so it couldn't be reclaimed or destroyed. He tapped the page. Every few centuries, somewhere across the dimensional web, someone is born with the right combination of psychological framework, the right shape of will, that the dispersed essence crystallizes around them." Izuku looked at the diagram. 12 wings. Green lightning. "You're saying I'm..." He stopped. Restarted. "You're saying this thing crystallized around me." "I'm saying the resonance you're putting out matches this pattern exactly." Azazel closed the book. "Which means whatever brought you here wasn't an accident. Dimensional corridors don't just fail. They fail at specific points, under specific pressures." He looked directly at Izuku. "Something pulled you here. Or something in you pulled toward here, and the corridor gave way at exactly the right point to put you in Ko instead of the void." The room was very quiet. Raynare, by the door, had unfolded her arms at some point during the explanation and was watching Izuku with an expression he couldn't quite read. "I'm still just a person," Izuku said. "So is every king, until they aren't," Azazel said, not unkindly. "I'm not," he stopped himself. Took a breath. "What does this mean practically? In your world? What are the implications?" Azazel smiled, and it was the smile of someone who had been waiting a very long time for a question exactly that practical. "It means you have a claim on the Grigori's empty throne. The fallen king's seat has been vacant since the original dispersal. We've operated as a council under my leadership, but the seat exists, and its power exists, and right now it's sitting inside you like a storm that hasn't broken yet." He paused. "It also means every faction in this world is going to notice. The devils will notice. The angels will notice. The old Satan faction will notice, and unlike us, they won't be interested in a conversation. So I have a target on my back. Multiple targets. Welcome to the supernatural world." Azazel picked up his chopsticks again. "The question is whether you'd rather have those targets with a throne backing you up, or without one." Izuku was quiet for a moment. He looked at the book. He looked at Azazel. He looked at Raynare, who was watching him with that unreadable expression, and thought about what she'd said in the air. "You didn't feel like prey." "What does accepting the throne require?" he asked. "Your wings," Azazel said simply. "They'll come when you stop running from the power. In my experience, the kind of person this lineage crystallizes around spends a lot of time running from it because they already have enough power and they know what it costs." He tilted his head. "Am I wrong?" Izuku thought about a 4-year-old sitting in a doctor's office being told he'd never have what everyone else had. He thought about running toward fires his whole life. He thought about the weight of one for all and what it had cost the people who carried it before him. "No," he said quietly. "You're not wrong. Get some sleep," Azazel said. "Raynare will show you to a room. Tomorrow we start figuring out what you can do, and the day after that, the world is going to start figuring out that you exist." He paused, with something in his expression that looked almost like respect. "Try to be ready for that." Raynare pushed off from the wall and walked to the door, pausing with her hand on the frame. "This way," she said, not looking back. Izuku stood up. He left the noodle container on the bench, half empty, which was an improvement on how the day had started. In the corridor, with the door closed behind them and the library laboratory quiet on the other side of it, Raynare walked ahead of him with her wings half folded and her heels silent on the stone floor. The corridor was lit warm and low, the mountain pressing in around them in a way that was oddly comforting, solid and old. "You believed him," she said, still not looking back. About the lineage? About all of it. The diagram matched, he said. And he didn't have any reason to fabricate it on 3 hours' notice. A pause. Did you know? When you found me? She was quiet for a step, 2 steps. I knew something was wrong. Or right. Depending on how you look at it. Her voice was careful, measuring itself. Fallen angels feel resonance the way humans feel temperature. You walked into that alley and the air changed. She stopped at a door and pushed it open, a room inside, plain and clean, a bed and a window looking out onto mountain dark. I almost didn't report it. Why? She turned and looked at him fully for the first time since they'd left Azazel's room, and her expression was the most honest it had been all night, stripped of the performance, the practiced amusement, the professional cool. Underneath all of it was something that looked a lot like a person who had been told their whole existence meant one thing and was standing at the edge of it meaning something else entirely. Because things that change everything always end badly, she said. Izuku looked at her for a moment. Or they end differently, he said. Which isn't the same thing. She held his gaze for 1 beat longer than was strictly professional. Then she pulled the door back and stepped aside. Sleep, she said. You look terrible. I always look like this. That explains a lot, she said, and walked away down the corridor, and Izuku watched her go for exactly 1 second before stepping inside and closing the door. He sat on the edge of the bed in the dark, in the mountain, in the wrong world, and put both hands over his face. Then he took a breath. Then he lay down, still in his torn costume, and was asleep within 4 minutes. Outside the window, the mountain pressed close and old against the dark. And somewhere deep in Izuku's chest, in the place where One for All had lived and left a silence behind it, something else was waking up. Slow and enormous. Patient as gravity. It didn't rush. It had been waiting for a very long time already, scattered across the dimensional dark, and now it had found the shape it had been looking for. It could afford to let the boy sleep. For now. When he dreamed of wings. 12 of them. Black as deep water, shot through with threads of green fire that pulsed in time with his heartbeat. In the dream he was standing on something that wasn't solid ground but held him anyway, and below him was everything, every world, every corridor, every gap between things, and he wasn't afraid of any of it. He wasn't a hero in the dream. He wasn't a villain either. He was something older than either category. Something that had been looking for a person with exactly the right shape of will, someone who ran toward fires, someone who catalogued variables instead of panicking, someone who asked what does it cost before they asked what do I get, and had finally, across all that dimensional dark, found him. When he woke up 6 hours later, the window was gray with early morning, and his hands were shaking. Not from fear. From power. Just barely contained, just barely under the surface, pressing at his skin from the inside like a storm front looking for the opening it needed. Green light flickered between his knuckles, brief, electric, there and gone in an instant, and then his hand steadied, and the room was ordinary again. Izuku sat up. Looked at his hands. Turned them over. Okay, he said quietly. Just to hear his own voice. Then he got up and went to find Raynare, because this world wasn't going to figure itself out without him, and he'd never been good at waiting. Chapter 2, What the Feathers Remember. The training courtyard was carved into the mountain's eastern face, open to the sky on one side and enclosed on the other 3 by stone walls that bore the scorch marks and impact craters of what looked like decades of serious use. Izuku stood in the middle of it in borrowed clothes, a dark shirt and pants that almost fit, courtesy of a Grigori quartermaster who'd looked at him the way people look at something they can't quite categorize, and watched the dawn come up over the valley below while his hands did that thing again. Green light, flickering between his fingers. There and gone. He'd been trying to control it for the past 20 minutes. Not suppress it, he'd learned enough from All Might and the vestige about suppression to know that fighting the power was the wrong approach. He was trying to listen to it, the way you listen to an unfamiliar engine to figure out what it wants. What it wanted, as far as he could tell, was to be enormous. "You look like you're trying to have a conversation with your own skeleton," said Raynare from the courtyard entrance. She was carrying 2 cups of something hot and she looked like she'd been awake for a while already, hair pulled back, jacket on, the particular alertness of someone who hadn't fully slept rather than someone who'd just woken up. She crossed the courtyard and held out one of the cups without ceremony. Izuku took it. "Tea, strong and slightly bitter. How long have you been watching?" "Long enough." She stood beside him and looked at his hands, where the green light had stopped flickering the moment she appeared, which he found interesting. "It responds to your emotional state. Everything does, with this kind of power." He wrapped both hands around the cup. "In my world, when I first started using One for All, it would spike whenever I felt something strongly enough. Fear. Determination. The time I was really, genuinely angry," he paused, "that was a bad day for the building I was standing in." "What were you angry about?" "Someone hurt a friend." He said it simply. Raynare looked out over the valley. The sky was going from gray to the pale gold of early morning, the kind of light that made everything look provisional, like the world was still deciding what it wanted to be that day. "The power you're putting out now," she said, "it's not responding to fear. It's not responding to determination either." She glanced at him sideways. "It's responding to wanting." "Wanting what?" "That's what you need to figure out." Azazel's voice came from the doorway before Izuku could respond. "She's right, and you should listen to her because she's smarter than she lets on, which is something I've been telling her for 3 years. Raynare's expression didn't change, but something around her eyes tightened fractionally. "You're early." "I didn't sleep." He came into the courtyard with the energy of a person who runs on curiosity instead of rest, a tablet under one arm and a stylus behind his ear. He was dressed more casually than he'd appeared on the screen, dark shirt, no jacket, and in person the quality of his attention was even sharper. He looked at Izuku's hands with the focused pleasure of a scientist getting exactly the data he'd hoped for. "The flickers started this morning?" "About half an hour ago." "Consistent with the lineage timeline." He set the tablet on a stone bench and brought up the diagram from the book, the 12-winged figure with the lightning threading through. "The dispersed essence doesn't transfer all at once. It's more like..." He searched for the analogy, a precipitation event. "Conditions have to be right. The temperature has to drop to exactly the right point before it crystallizes. You crossed into this world and the conditions were already different enough, different dimensional pressure, different sacred energy density, that the process accelerated. How long does it take to complete? Unknown. The texts describe the process but the timescales vary. Days to weeks, in most accounts." He picked up the tablet again. "But the flickers mean the first crystallization has begun. Which means we need to start working with it now, before it builds pressure without any channel to move through." "And if it builds pressure without a channel?" Azazel looked at him evenly. "You'd survive it." "Probably. The surrounding environment might not." Izuku nodded once. "What's the training approach?" "Not training, exactly. More like..." Azazel made a gesture that somehow conveyed both precision and vagueness simultaneously. "A conversation. The lineage essence is ancient. It has preferences. You have a will of your own. The process of becoming what you're becoming is less about learning techniques and more about negotiating the terms." He paused. "Which sounds mystical and irritating, I know. Think of it as an internship where your employer is 12,000 years old and you are expected to earn their respect before they'll let you access the servers. That's an extremely specific analogy. I've had time to develop it." Azazel sat on the stone bench. "Raynare is going to help you." She turned from the valley view sharply. "I'm going to, what?" "The lineage essence responds to fallen angel resonance. It's part of its nature, it is a fallen nature, dispersed and reformed." Having a fallen angel present during the early sessions creates a feedback loop that helps the crystallization find its shape. He said it with the particular tone of someone presenting information that is entirely factual and is genuinely puzzled by the resistance it's meeting. You could do that yourself, Raynare said. I could. But I'm also the Governor General of the Grigori, and 3 factions are going to start asking questions about our new houseguest within 48 hours, so I have other things to do. He picked up his tablet. Also, you found him. That matters. The lineage acknowledges first contact, it's in the texts. Raynare looked at Izuku. Izuku looked at Raynare. Neither of them said anything. Wonderful, Azazel said, standing up. I'll check in at noon. Try not to level the courtyard. He walked out, already reading something on his tablet, and the mountain swallowed the sound of his footsteps quickly. The courtyard was quiet. The morning light had warmed another degree, touching the stone walls and the old scorch marks, and the 2 of them standing 3 meters apart with their cups of tea. He does this, Raynare said, not quite to anyone in particular. Assign people to things without asking. Assign people to things that turn out to be extremely significant without making it seem like a big deal. She looked at her cup, then at him. What do you need? Start by standing close, he said. And tell me if anything changes from your side. What followed was 3 hours that Izuku would later describe, to Azazel's genuine delight, as the most educational fight he'd never had. Raynare stood near him, close enough that he could feel the particular energy she put off, something cold and electric and old, like a storm system that had been around long enough to develop opinions, and he worked with the flickers. It wasn't combat training. It was more like physical therapy for a power that had never had a body before. He pushed, the power pushed back. Raynare watched the interactions with the sharp focus of someone who'd grown up in a world where energy was as visible and readable as body language. She told him what she saw. He adjusted. They ran the feedback loop until his hands stopped flickering randomly and started responding to direction. Small steps. But real ones. Around the 2nd hour, something shifted. He was running a controlled push, trying to hold a steady output through his right hand for a full minute without the green light spiking or dropping, and the power went sideways without warning. Not violent. Just large, suddenly, expanding outward from his center in a pulse that he felt in his teeth and his sternum simultaneously. Raynare staggered back 1 step. Her wings snapped open involuntarily, catching her balance, and she stood there with her wings spread and her eyes wide, and something in her expression that he hadn't seen before, something that looked a lot like awe and didn't sit comfortably on her face. What was that? He said. That was, she closed her wings deliberately, folding them back with visible effort, that was the lineage pulse. The first major one. She exhaled. When it does that, every fallen in a significant radius feels it. How significant? I'd guess. She considered, 50 kilometers. Maybe more. Izuku looked at his right hand. The green light had settled into a steady glow that wasn't flickering anymore, running from his wrist to his fingertips in a clean, even current that moved like, he realized with a small shock, exactly like lightning, contained and directed, not random, not chaotic. Intentional. Does it hurt? She asked, studying it. No. He turned his hand over. The light moved with the motion, obedient. It feels like, he searched for the right word, coming home. Which makes no sense, because I've never had this. Maybe you always had it and you just couldn't hear it until One for All was gone. He looked up at her. She said it like a throwaway observation, turning away to pick up her abandoned teacup, but the words sat in the air of the courtyard and didn't leave. By the time Azazel came back at noon, Izuku could hold the steady output for 10 minutes, pulse it in controlled bursts, and, once, briefly, that had startled both of them, pull it back into himself in a compression that had made the air around him crackle and gone dark before releasing in a sharp crack of green lightning that had taken a chunk out of the courtyard wall. Excellent, Azazel said, looking at the wall. Sorry about the wall has survived worse. Come inside. I need to show you something, and also several things have happened this morning and I want you to know about them before they become your problem. He was already moving. Both of you. The Situation Room, a circular space off the main research wing, all screens and a large central table, had 4 other people in it when they arrived. 2 Izuku recognized from the Kuo facility, the woman from the console, whose name turned out to be Shuriya, and the young operative Middlet. The other 2 were new, a tall male fallen with a scarred jaw who was introduced as Barakiel, and a compact, intense woman named Armoros who seemed to be the senior tactical officer. On the main screen, a map. 3 distinct regions marked in different colors, centered on Kuo with ripples spreading outward. The pulse this morning was felt by multiple parties, Azazel said, pointing at the map. Our sensors picked up immediate response activity from the Devil faction in the Kuo region, specifically from the Gremory Peerage, which operates a school presence there. The Seraph monitoring network also registered it, though their response is slower and more bureaucratic, so we have more time there. He looked at Izuku. And there are 3 old Satan faction agents in Kuo who are already conducting surveillance. They got a very clear picture of where the pulse originated. How much time before they move? Armoros asked. The old Satan faction. Hours. Maybe less. Azazel looked at Izuku. The devils, the Gremory girl specifically, are more measured. She'll want information before she acts. That gives us a day, possibly 2. What does the old Satan faction want? Izuku asked. The same thing anyone wants when they detect a power vacuum being filled, Azazel said. To either control it or destroy it before someone else does. He pulled up a file on the screen, photographs, energy readings, mission reports. They have no interest in the 3-faction peace agreement. They want the old world back, devil supremacy, angels as enemies, fallen angels as weapons. A fallen king represents something very specific to them, a power that should belong to their agenda. But doesn't, Izuku said. But emphatically does not. Azazel turned from the screen. Here's the situation as I see it. You have a legitimate lineage claim to the Grigori's empty throne. That claim is not yet formalized, you haven't manifested your wings, the full crystallization isn't complete. Right now you're powerful but unconfirmed, which makes you a target rather than a protected party. He looked at Izuku with that direct, calibrated gaze. I am proposing to accelerate the formalization. Not because of the political cover, though that matters, but because the power needs an anchor. A throne is an anchor. Without it, the crystallization will complete on its own timeline, and that timeline might not care about what's happening around you when it does. The room was quiet for a moment. Barakiel, who hadn't spoken yet, said, the boy should understand what he's agreeing to. I'd like that too, Izuku said. He looked at Azazel. A throne isn't just a title. What are the actual obligations? Azazel sat on the edge of the central table. The Grigori operates as the fallen angel faction in the 3-way balance of power between angels, devils, and fallen. I run it as Governor General. The throne you'd occupy is the lineage seat, it's older than the Grigori as an organization, and its power is specifically the power of the original dispersed cadre lord. What that means practically, you would hold authority within the Grigori hierarchy at the highest level. My authority is organizational. Yours would be elemental, it comes from the power itself, not from appointment. Would that create a conflict with your authority? Azazel smiled. Ask me again in 6 months. Right now, no. The lineage throne and the Grigori governorship are parallel structures. They have different functions. Mine is political and administrative. Yours is, he searched for the word, foundational. You'd be the anchor the faction's sacred energy routes through. And the obligations? Protect the faction. Be present when the power is needed. Don't start wars that benefit only you. He paused. Try not to antagonize all 3 factions simultaneously within the first month. "I've found that's a useful general policy." Izuku looked at the map. He looked at the photographs on the screen, the old Satan faction agents, the energy readings from the Gremory territory. He looked at Raynare, standing near the wall with her arms crossed and her expression carefully neutral. "If I don't accept," he said, "what happens to the power?" "It crystallizes anyway," Azazel said. "On its own terms. Without your active agreement, the lineage essence treats you as a vessel rather than a partner. The difference is..." He considered, the difference between a river with banks and a flood. Same water. Very different results. Izuku nodded slowly. "Then I accept," he said, "on the condition that I understand what's happening to me and have access to all the information you have about this lineage. I'm not walking into power blind." "I would be disappointed if you were," Azazel said. "And I want a say in how the Grigori responds to the other factions. Not control, input. I'm new here, I don't know the history well enough to lead negotiations. But I should be in the room." "Done. And Raynare stays assigned to this." He glanced at her. Her expression had shifted slightly, not surprise, exactly, but something adjacent to it. "Whatever Azazel said about first contact and the lineage, she's the one who found me and she's the one who brought me here. That counts for something." A beat of silence. Raynare was looking at him with that unreadable expression again, the one he was slowly learning to read, the one that meant she was running a recalculation. "Also done," Azazel said. "Anything else?" "Not yet." Izuku looked at the map one more time. "How do we formalize the claim?" The answer, as it turned out, involved going underground. Not metaphorically. Literally underground, into the part of the mountain that had been carved out before the research facility existed, before the Grigori as a modern organization existed, where the stone was old in a way that had weight to it, pressing in from all sides with the accumulated density of millennia. The chamber at the end of the carved passage was circular and tall, the ceiling lost in shadow above them. The walls were covered in markings, not decorative, Izuku understood immediately, but functional, inscribed with the same dense precision as the diagrams in Azazel's book. At the center of the chamber floor, a pattern had been cut deep into the stone and filled with something that wasn't quite metal and wasn't quite light. It sat dormant and dim, like an ember. "Every Grigori facility has one of these," Azazel said, standing at the chamber entrance. "Most of them have been dark for centuries. They're designed to respond to the lineage resonance." He looked at Izuku. "Stand in the center." Izuku walked to the center of the pattern and stood on it. The material underfoot changed immediately, warmer, vibrating at a frequency just below hearing, like a note played too low for ears but felt clearly in the chest. "What do I do?" he said. "Stop asking what you do," Azazel said, not unkindly. "You've been managing the power with your training instincts, which are excellent but are also designed for a different kind of power. This one doesn't want to be managed. It wants to be chosen." Raynare was standing at the edge of the chamber, near the entrance, and she said quietly, "You told me once, in the courtyard, that it felt like coming home. Let it." He looked at her. She was watching the pattern under his feet, not him, but her voice had been entirely steady and entirely genuine. Izuku exhaled. Stopped managing it. Stopped cataloging variables and running calculations and holding the power at the arm's length of professional competence, and just, let it be what it was. The thing in his chest that had been pressing at his skin from the inside. The storm that had been looking for the shape it wanted. The 12,000-year-old dispersed will of a being who had wanted something badly enough to fall, and then wanted something more badly enough to scatter across all of creation rather than let it die. The pattern under his feet ignited. Not fire, light, but denser than light, with the texture of something alive. It ran up through the carved lines in the stone floor and hit the walls, and the wall markings lit in sequence, one after another, traveling up toward the ceiling and filling the chamber from the bottom up with a cold radiance that was green-threaded at its edges, alive with the same lightning that had been crackling in his hands all morning. The pressure in his chest released. It was like, He searched for the right internal comparison and found it immediately. It was like the moment One for All had fully activated for the first time. That sensation of a door opening that you didn't know had been closed. Except this was a door that opened outward into everything, rather than inward into a finite reserve, and the difference in scale was enough to take his breath away. His back lit up. Not pain, pressure. Something unfolding from points along his shoulder blades, pushing through the borrowed shirt, expanding into the lit air of the chamber. Wings. 12 of them. He couldn't see them directly, but he could feel them, enormous and present, their edges crackling with green lightning, their surfaces the deep black of space between stars. He could feel the air moving against their faces, the complex weight of them distributed perfectly across his back without effort, like they had always been there and had just been waiting for permission to appear. The chamber was fully lit now, blazing with the ancient pattern, and the light it threw across the stone walls was green-edged and electric, and the shadows it cast from Izuku's 12 wings reached the ceiling. Azazel was very still at the chamber entrance. His expression was the expression of a researcher who has spent centuries on a problem and has just, in one morning, seen it resolve. He said. Which was the same thing he'd said on the screen the night before, but this time it carried about 300 times more weight. Raynare's breath made a sound. Just one sharp intake, quickly controlled. When Izuku turned to look at her, her expression had broken open slightly, the careful professional cool cracked along its edges, and underneath it was something raw that she hadn't intended him to see. She wasn't afraid. She wasn't awed, exactly, either. She looked like someone recognizing something they'd been looking for without knowing they were looking. She looked away when she realized he was watching. Pulled her expression back together with visible, deliberate effort. The text said 12 wings, she said, to Azazel, her voice steady. They did, Azazel agreed. Most fallen have between 2 and 10. Yes. 12 is, she stopped. Unprecedented in living memory, Azazel said. Yes. He looked at Izuku. How do you feel? Izuku thought about the honest answer. Large, he said. Azazel laughed, that genuine, surprised laugh, same as the night before. That's about right. He walked into the chamber and stood in front of Izuku with his hands in his pockets, looking up at the wings that were currently requiring architectural forgiveness from the ceiling. Welcome to the Grigori, king of the 8th circle. Try not to break anything on the way out. He couldn't fold them immediately. That was the first practical problem. The wings had opinions about their size and didn't respond to the same kind of management the power had previously refused. It took Raynare 45 minutes in the corridor outside the chamber, demonstrating her own wing folding with patient and increasingly irritated repetition, before he managed to reduce them to something that could navigate a doorway. You're doing it like you're trying to close a manual, she said. It's not mechanical. It's more like, holding your breath. The wings and the extended state are the natural position. Folded is the held breath. That's counterintuitive. Welcome to fallen angel anatomy. He tried it her way. The wings folded, not neatly, not comfortably, but enough to move through the corridor without causing structural damage, and the green lightning that had been crackling along their edges reduced to a faint glow as they compressed. Better, she said. Paused. How did it feel? In the chamber. He considered how honest to be. Like I'd been half of something for a long time, he said, and stopped being half. She walked ahead of him down the corridor. The lineage essence, she said, after a moment, the original cadre lord, the texts don't say what he wanted. What he fell for. Does it matter? It matters what kind of will you've inherited. Whatever he wanted, Izuku said, I'm not him. The essence crystallized around me because of the shape of my will, right? Not his. He thought of All Might. Of Nana Shimura. Of a line of people who had passed something forward because they believed in what it was for. This is mine now. Whatever the original owner wanted, I have my own things I want. She stopped walking. Turned. What do you want? He looked at her steadily. To understand this world well enough to protect what matters in it. To build something worth building here. And to go home eventually, if there's a way, but not to leave something broken behind when I do. Her expression did the thing again, the recalculation, the small shift that moved behind her eyes like weather moving behind glass. That's a very heroic answer. I used to be a hero, he said simply. Some things don't change because the world does. She turned and kept walking. But her wings, folded tight against her back, shifted slightly, adjusting, the way wings do when the body they're attached to is working through something it hasn't decided yet. The afternoon brought the texts. Azazel spent 4 hours walking Izuku through the lineage documents with the focused pleasure of a researcher finally able to apply 2 centuries of theoretical work. The 8th circle throne came with specific abilities, the 12 wings were the visible expression of them, but the substance was more complex. The lineage power operated on the principle of dominion rather than raw force, not the ability to destroy anything, but the ability to make anything that fell within the throne's sphere recognize its own nature. Sacred energy under the king's domain became more fully what it was. Fallen angel resonance sharpened. Devil's power of destruction stabilized. It's a structuring power, Azazel explained. Not a weapon, primarily. Though it can be weaponized. He looked at Izuku across the workbench. The reason every faction will want to control you, or eliminate you, is that whoever the king of the 8th circle backs has a fundamental energy advantage over opposition. You're not an army. You're the reason an army fights better. Doctrine over offense, Izuku said. Exactly. Which makes you more valuable than any single weapon. He paused. And also more dangerous than any single weapon, because destroying you would require them to fight you, and no one who has read these texts wants to do that. Why not? The dominion power works in combat as well, Azazel said mildly. Any opponent who enters your sphere of influence during a fight finds their own power increasingly subject to your structuring effect. You can use their strength against them by taking their power's shape and redirecting it. He paused. The texts describe the original cadre lord once defeating an entire angelic host by turning their own divine energy into the anchor for his wings' expansion. The host's power made him larger. The larger he grew, the more they fed him. It was apparently quite spectacular and deeply unfair. Izuku thought about this for a long moment. That's... He stopped. Started again. I need to practice that somewhere no one will get hurt before I ever use it in a real situation. Obviously, Azazel said. That's why I'm telling you now instead of during a battle. A knock at the lab door. Armoros opened it without waiting. Update, she said to Azazel, her tone clipped and professional. The old Satan faction moved faster than projected. 2 of the 3 surveillance agents in Kuo are gone, pulled back or repositioned. The 3rd is still active and has been transmitting. She looked at Izuku. And the Gremory peerage has moved. The young devil came through the school gate an hour ago. Rias Gremory is in Kuo. Azazel said. With her full peerage. She's establishing her base at the old school building. Armoros looked at the map on the screen behind her. She's not moving toward us. She's setting up observation. She wants to know what she's dealing with before she acts. Smart girl, Azazel said. He looked at Izuku. What are you thinking? Izuku was looking at the map. At Kuo, where his arrival had begun all this. At the triangle formed by the Grigori facility, the old Satan faction's last known position, and the school building where a devil princess was now waiting to see what moved first. I'm thinking, he said slowly, that sitting here waiting for them to figure us out is the wrong move. What's the right move? Go to Kuo. He looked at Azazel. Not to confront her. To introduce myself before someone else introduces me for their own purposes. Azazel considered this. Then he smiled, not the delighted researcher smile, but something older and more approving. The old Satan faction is going to have someone watching the Gremory position, he said. If you walk in there openly, you're visible. Good, Izuku said. Let them see me. Let them try to figure out what I am before I've finished figuring it out myself. That ambiguity is more valuable than any specific threat they could make right now. Azazel looked at Raynare. I like him, he said. You say that about everyone you're about to put in danger, she said. I say it about everyone who makes the situation more interesting. He stood up. Take him to Kuo. Introduce yourselves to the Gremory girl on your terms. He looked at Izuku. And Midoriya, try not to start a war in the first 48 hours. Even I have limits. No promises, Izuku said, but I'll aim for 49. Azazel laughed again, and this time Raynare's mouth moved at the corner, not quite a smile, but something just to the left of one, and she turned away before Izuku could be sure he'd seen it correctly. That evening, the mountain was quiet above them when Izuku stood on the terrace where they'd landed the night before and extended his wings fully for the first time in the open air. The valley below caught the last of the daylight. The mountain pressed solid at his back. His 12 wings spread wide, 14 meters tip to tip, the green lightning running their length in quiet pulses, and for a moment he just stood there, feeling the air against them, the extraordinary sensation of having this much more presence than a human body was designed for. Raynare landed beside him. She'd been up, checking the perimeter, she said, in a tone that suggested she'd also just needed to fly, which he understood. Ready for tomorrow? She asked, folding her wings. No, he said honestly. But that's never stopped me before. She looked at him sideways. The evening light was warm on her profile, the sharp features, the violet eyes that caught the light strangely. You know she's going to challenge you, she said. The Gremory girl. She won't be able to help it. Her territory, her school, her operational ground. A fallen king setting up in her backyard, she'll take it personally. Good, he said. Good. I'd rather deal with someone who takes it personally than someone who's just running a calculation. He looked out over the valley. Someone with skin in the game will be honest. Honest is easier to work with. Raynare was quiet for a moment. Then she said, very quietly, you keep doing that. Doing what? Saying the thing that makes it harder to not like you. She said it without warmth, without performance, stated like a complaint. A flat observation about a problem she hadn't signed up for. Stop it. Izuku looked at her. She was looking at the valley. Her expression was professionally neutral except for the slight tension at the corner of her jaw that he'd learned meant she was feeling something she didn't want to feel. Sorry, he said. You're not. No, he agreed, I'm really not. She made a sound that was the close cousin of a laugh and walked away, back toward the facility, and Izuku stood on the terrace with his wings folded and the valley going dark below him and felt, for the first time since hitting that alley floor, something that wasn't quite all right but was pointing in that direction. Tomorrow, Kuo. Tomorrow, the devil princess with the crimson hair who was setting up her pieces on a board that now had a new player neither of them had expected. He folded his wings tighter and went inside. Behind him, the terrace was empty and the valley was dark, and 300 kilometers away in Kuo, in the old school building's basement, Rias Gremory looked at an energy reading on her monitoring equipment and said, very quietly, to her queen, Akino. What is that? And Akino Himejima, who had been standing very still for 30 seconds with her hand pressed flat against the air like she was feeling for something, said, something old. Something very, very old. Her eyes were lit at the edges, the way they got when her fallen angel blood reacted to something it recognized. And it's coming here. Rias looked at the reading for another long moment. Then she sat back in her chair and thought, which was what she always did when something she didn't understand yet walked into her territory. She intended to understand it very quickly. Chapter 3, The Devil's Gambit. Kuo in the late afternoon looked like any other mid-sized Japanese city, students cycling home, convenience stores doing the after-school rush, the particular slant of autumn light that made everything look momentarily golden before the shadows took over. Izuku walked through it in dark civilian clothes with his wings compressed and the green lightning pulled back to almost nothing, a low hum under his skin that the people around him couldn't hear. Almost couldn't hear. A woman walking her dog crossed the street without looking at him, but the dog stopped dead on the pavement, sat down, and stared at Izuku with the focused intensity of an animal that was detecting something its owner's instruments couldn't register. Izuku looked at the dog. The dog looked back. Neither of them moved for a moment. Then the owner pulled the leash and the dog went, but it kept looking back over its shoulder until they were half a block away. "Animals feel it," Raynare said from beside him, without breaking stride. She was dressed in civilian clothes too, considerably better fitted than his borrowed Grigori kit, and she had the practiced ease of someone who'd operated in human spaces for years. "It unsettles them." "I used to be very good with dogs," he said. "You used to be human." "I'm still human." She glanced at him. "You have 12 wings and the energy signature of a 12,000-year-old fallen deity. Mostly human." The mostly is doing a lot of work in that sentence. "Focus," she said. He focused. The school building was 3 blocks north. He could feel it before he could see it, the particular quality of devil energy that Azazel had described as ordered darkness, structured and deliberate. The Gremory peerage was in there, and they knew he was coming. Armoros had confirmed it that morning, the Gremory monitoring equipment had tracked his wing manifestation from the mountain, and the energy signature had been consistent enough heading toward Ko that anyone paying attention would know approximately when he'd arrive. He'd made the approach openly. No concealment, no suppression of the lineage resonance. Azazel had suggested caution. Izuku had pointed out that caution would read as deception to anyone smart enough to detect him anyway, and walking in with his signature visible was a form of honesty that cost nothing but might buy a great deal. The old school building had that specific quality of places that have been claimed, not ownership by deed, but occupation by presence, the way a space absorbs the energy of the people who spend enough time in it. The Gremory faction had been operating here for long enough that the building felt like them, and it knew Izuku was not one of them. The front door opened before he could touch it. The one who opened it had long black hair and golden eyes and a smile that was doing something between welcoming and appraising him, the way a sommelier smiles at an unfamiliar bottle before deciding what it is. Her fallen angel blood, and it was there, Izuku felt at the moment she opened the door, humming in a register he now recognized the way you recognize your own language, did something when it hit his resonance. Her smile went slightly unsteady at the edges. "Midoriya Izuku," she said. "Akino Himejima. Please come in." "Thank you," he said. Her eyes moved to Raynare. Something passed between them, not hostility, but a mutual assessment. Two people with similar blood in their ancestry, standing on opposite sides of a threshold, measuring the distance. "And you," Akino said. Raynare said flatly. "Grigori. I know who you are." Akino stepped back to let them in. Her smile had resettled into something more controlled, but her eyes kept moving back to Izuku with that unsettled quality, like she was trying to locate a sound she couldn't quite place. Inside, the building's supernatural layer was even more evident, the space between spaces that devil power created, the way a room feels different when it's been used as more than a room. Izuku walked through it and felt his lineage resonance push gently against the Gremory energy, not aggressively, just existing alongside it the way two weather fronts exist alongside each other before deciding whether to merge or create a storm. The room they were taken to was at the back of the building, furnished with the kind of comfortable excess that suggested someone who'd grown up wealthy enough that luxury was simply the default. Books, a couch, a chess set on a side table that had been mid-game and abandoned. And standing at the window with the afternoon light behind her, which Izuku suspected was not an accident, was Rias Gremory. She was striking in a way that had clearly been useful her entire life, the crimson hair, the blue-green eyes, the particular quality of self-possession that came from being born into power and having the intelligence to understand what that meant. She was studying him with those eyes before she spoke, running the same kind of rapid assessment he was running on her, and he had the immediate impression of someone extremely competent at reading situations. She was also, he noted, doing her best not to show that she found him surprising. She was not entirely succeeding. "Midoriya Izuku," she said. Her voice was even, controlled, with a warmth underneath it that was genuine but currently being held at diplomatic distance. "I'm Rias Gremory. You've come quite far in a short time." "The situation moved quickly," he said. "I thought an introduction would be better than a report." "How considerate." She moved from the window, unhurrying, taking the space naturally, the way people do when they're used to rooms belonging to them, and sat on the edge of the couch. She didn't offer him the chair across from it, which he noticed. "Sit," she said then, which was either a late offer or a reassertion of control. He sat, which made it neither. Raynare took up a position near the wall behind him, standing, which was where she was most comfortable in any room. "You appeared in Kuo 3 days ago," Rias said. "From another dimension, if Azazel's initial brief to the faction leaders is accurate. You've been identified as the crystallization point for the 8th Circle lineage. And now you're sitting in my clubroom." She tilted her head. "I'd say it's been an interesting week for everyone." "Azazel briefed the Devil faction," Izuku said. "A courtesy notice. In the interest of the 3-faction agreement." Her eyes were direct and sharp. He was notably short on details. "What would you like to know?" She was quiet for a moment, and he had the sense she was recalibrating. She'd expected deflection, or at least more diplomatic hedging, and directness had wrong-footed her the same way it had wrong-footed Raynare in the alley. She recovered smoothly, but he'd caught it. "What are you planning to do?" she asked. "In this world. You have a lineage claim, a faction, and a power set that frankly concerns me." She said concerns me without apology, stating it as fact. "I'd like to know what your intentions are regarding Kuo specifically." "This is my territory." "I know that," he said. "I have no interest in your territory. The Grigori's operational footprint here predates my arrival, and I have no plans to expand it." He paused. "But I won't pretend I don't exist here. Or that what I am doesn't affect the balance of things." "The balance of things," she repeated. "The 3-faction agreement has held for a significant time through very careful equilibrium. A new variable of this magnitude," she stopped, choosing her next words with evident care, "disrupts that equilibrium. Or stabilizes it," he said. "Depending on what the variable does." Her eyes sharpened. "The 8th Circle Dominion power structure's sacred energy. Makes everything within its sphere more fully what it is." She'd done her reading too, he could see it in the precision of her knowledge. "That means in any conflict, you'd be an amplifier for whoever you're backing." "Yes. Which makes you the single most significant political asset in the 3-faction world right now." "Probably. And you walked in here voluntarily." She studied him. "Without a security arrangement. Without a formal position declaration. Without any of the negotiating tools you should theoretically be bringing to this meeting." A pause. "Why?" "Because I'm not here to negotiate," he said simply. "I'm here to meet you." "There's a difference." Something moved in her eyes. "Just briefly. You realize that's either very naive or very confident." "I used to be a hero," he said. "In my world, walking into the problem without body armor was the standard approach. You learn things in the first 10 seconds that you never learn from reports." "And what have you learned in the first 10 seconds, she asked, and there was something in her voice that wasn't entirely professional anymore, a thread of genuine curiosity cutting through the diplomatic surface. "That you're more concerned about the 3-faction balance than you are about power for its own sake," he said. "That you're managing something you care about, not just something you own. And that you're smart enough to know that the old Satan faction is going to use my arrival as a destabilization event regardless of what I do, which means your real problem isn't me." He looked at her steadily. Your real problem is that something just changed the board and you're not sure who it benefits. Rias' Gremory was quiet for a 3 count. Behind Izuku, Raynare was completely still. Beside Rias, Akino had gone from her composed smile to something more open, less performed, her golden eyes moving between Izuku and Rias with unconcealed interest. You read the room very quickly, Rias said. I spent a long time reading rooms where being wrong got people hurt, he said. Another beat. Then, to his genuine surprise, the corners of her mouth moved, not the controlled diplomatic expression she'd been wearing, but something more involuntary, pulled out of her by the situation rather than chosen. I need to think about what you've told me, she said. And what you haven't told me. Fair, he said. Take the time. However. She stood up, smooth and deliberate. While I'm thinking, I'd like to propose something practical. I'm listening. Stay in Kuo, she said. Not as a guest of the Grigori. As a visible presence. The old Satan faction has 3 operatives watching this district, and 2 of them repositioned when you arrived. The optics of you and the Gremory peerage existing in the same space without conflict is more disruptive to their agenda than either of us acting independently. She met his eyes directly. You said you had no interest in using my territory. Prove it by using it openly, with me watching. It was, he had to admit, an elegant move. She was proposing surveillance with better framing. She was also, underneath the political logic, extending something that wasn't quite an olive branch but was pointing in that direction. I can do that, he said. On the condition that anything your monitoring equipment picks up on the old Satan faction gets shared with the Grigori. Obviously, she said, and the word carried a faint undertone of I was going to do that anyway, but good for you for asking. He stood up. They faced each other across the room, same height, roughly, which he hadn't noticed until now, and there was a moment where the 2 energy signatures in the room, the Gremory power and the lineage resonance, pressed against each other not in conflict but in recognition. Like 2 very different pieces of the same puzzle discovering they're made of compatible material. Rias felt it. He saw her feel it, a small stillness, a brief interruption of the controlled composure. She looked at him with something that wasn't quite the diplomatic Gremory heiress anymore. It was faster and less managed and she pulled it back quickly, but not quite quickly enough. My household will be at Kuo Academy as students starting tomorrow, she said, back to smooth. If you intend to maintain a visible presence, that's the most natural cover. School, he said. School, she confirmed. Do you have a problem with school? I went to the most dangerous high school in Japan, he said. This should be fine. They left the clubroom, walked back through the building, and out into the evening air of Kuo. The street was quieter now, post-dinner lull, the convenience store on the corner doing slow business. Raynare fell into step beside him and said nothing for half a block. That went well, he said. She's going to try to figure you out, Raynare said. I know. She's very good at figuring people out. I know that too. He looked at the street ahead. What did you think of Akino? Raynare was quiet for a moment. Her fallen blood was reacting to you the whole time, she said. She was controlling it very carefully. But it was reacting. The lineage resonance. The lineage resonance and something else. She paused, choosing words. Fallen angel blood responds to power it recognizes. Hers recognized yours. Another pause. She looked at you the way fallen look at something they've been missing without knowing what it was. Izuku thought about that. That could be a problem. Or not, Raynare said, in a tone that suggested she hadn't decided yet what it was. They walked another block. The mountain was invisible from here, too far, too dark, but he could feel the Grigori facility the same way he could feel Rias Gremory's clubroom behind them. 2 poles of a complex magnetic field, and him walking the line between them. His phone, new, Grigori issued, fully functional in this world, buzzed. Azazel. How did it go? He typed back, we're enrolling in high school. 3 seconds. Of course you are. Don't fail your exams. The Grigori's reputation is at stake. He put the phone away. He thinks it's funny, Raynare said, having apparently read his expression. Everything is funny to him. Until it isn't. Her voice was neutral, but there was a current under it. Azazel plays the casual angle very well. But he's been fighting for the Grigori's survival for longer than most factions have existed. When things stop being funny to him, it happens very fast. She looked straight ahead. Don't mistake the humor for lightness. I don't, Izuku said. He's the most serious person I've met in this world. He just wears it differently. She looked at him sideways, briefly. You're good at reading people. It's all I had for a long time, he said. Before the power. I couldn't fight, so I learned to watch. A beat. What was it like? Not having power in a world built around it. He thought about this honestly, because she'd asked honestly and she deserved the same. It taught me that power isn't the variable that matters, he said. The variable that matters is what you're willing to do. Some people with power do nothing. Some people without it change everything. He paused. And then some people get both, which is when things get complicated. Raynare was quiet for a half block more. The evening was settling in properly now, the street lights coming on, going domestic and ordinary around them in the way cities do when the working day ends. What was your world like? She asked. Actually like. It was the most personal question she'd asked him. He recognized it as such. She was offering something by asking it, a lowering of the professional guard, and he answered in kind. Loud, he said. Bright. Everyone had a superpower and the ones who didn't were treated like they were broken. 70% of the population with abilities, and the whole world was organized around that division. He let himself feel it for a moment, the shape of what he was from, its streets and its heroes and its very specific kind of terrible beauty. It had problems. Big ones. But the people in it, some of them were the best people I've ever known. Do you think you'll go back? I don't know, he said honestly. I don't know if there's a way. Azazel's working on it, I asked him to. But I also, he stopped. Also what? I woke up this morning with 12 wings, he said. Whatever I was before I came here, I'm not exactly that anymore. Going back, I don't know what going back means now. He looked at the street ahead. I try not to think about it too much. It doesn't help anything. Raynare nodded. Once, slow. That's very practical of you. It's the only thing I know how to be. It's not the only thing, she said quietly, and then seemed to catch herself and said nothing else for the rest of the walk, which Izuku respected, and filed away, and did not push. Kuo Academy in the morning was organized chaos of the specific type that exists in every Japanese high school, the homeroom rush, the shoe lockers, the particular social thermodynamics of a space where everyone is figuring out who they are at the same time as everyone else. Izuku walked in with his wings compressed and his lineage resonance pulled to its lowest possible register, Raynare beside him with her own energy carefully managed, both of them enrolled as transfer students through some bureaucratic sleight of hand that the Grigori had apparently had on standby for operational use. The classroom was ordinary. The desks were ordinary. The windows let in good light and the teacher was a nervous man who introduced them with the careful energy of someone who had been told these particular students came with unusual circumstances but had not been told exactly what circumstances. Izuku sat down. Opened a notebook. Wrote the date at the top. From across the classroom, Rias Gremory watched him with those sharp blue-green eyes and said nothing, which was itself a kind of conversation. From the desk one row to his left, Akino Himejima smiled, a different smile than yesterday, something less performed, more genuine, and the fallen blood in her hummed against his resonance like a tuning fork finding its frequency. He wrote down the day's first lesson. History. He'd always liked history. The normalcy of it was, in its own way, the strangest thing that had happened to him yet. Stranger than the wings. Stranger than the throne. This specific, human-scale strangeness of sitting in a classroom and writing notes while several factions worth of supernatural tension stretched across the room like high-voltage wire, visible to anyone with the right instruments and invisible to everyone else. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Under the desk, he checked it. Azazel, old Satan faction moved 2 assets out of Kuo overnight. Third is still active. Also, something interesting, the church sent an exorcist to the district 3 days ago. Didn't brief us. A pause. Getting more interesting by the hour. Don't do anything I wouldn't do. Izuku looked up from his phone and caught Rias Gremory watching him from across the classroom. Her expression didn't change. His didn't either. He turned back to the board and kept taking notes, and outside the classroom window the sky was clear and the day was young, and somewhere in the city the old Satan faction's remaining operative was making calculations about what to do next. He wrote down the date again at the top of a new page, for no reason except that it helped him feel grounded. Kuo. Fallen King. Devil Princess. An exorcist nobody had mentioned. A world that hadn't asked for him and was already rearranging itself around the fact of him. He circled the date. Underlined it. Start of something, he wrote. Then he crossed it out, because that was the kind of thing that sounded right in your head and looked sentimental on paper, and he had never been good at sentimentality. He was good at watching things carefully and moving when the moment was right and making sure the people around him were okay. He could work with that. From 2 rows away, Rias Gremory was still watching him. Not with the diplomatic assessment of yesterday. With something more honest and less managed, the kind of attention you pay to things that you can't stop thinking about. He pretended not to notice. He noticed completely. The lunch break brought the first test. He'd been expecting something from the classroom dynamic, some probe, some low-stakes power move from the Gremory side to establish the terms of coexistence. What he hadn't expected was for it to come from outside the faction entirely. The rooftop had a good view of the city, which was why he'd gone up there with his lunch instead of the cafeteria. He was eating and running through Azazel's morning brief in his head when he heard the footsteps, not Raynare's. She'd gone to meet a Grigori contact near the train station, not Gremory, wrong energy signature, something else. The exorcist who came through the rooftop door was young, probably his age, which he found briefly disorienting, with short silver-white hair, blue eyes, and the particular posture of someone who's been in physical training since they could walk. She was carrying a sword on her back under a school uniform that didn't quite conceal the weapon-length shape, and she looked at Izuku with an expression of someone who had been given very specific intelligence and was currently seeing something that didn't entirely match it. "You're smaller than I expected," she said. "I get that a lot," he said. She came onto the rooftop properly, hand not on the sword but near it. Zenobia Quarta. Vatican exorcist. I was sent to assess the Fallen King crystallization event. She said it like a report, clipped and professional, though the professionalism had a directness to it that felt personal rather than trained. My orders are to determine if you pose a threat to the church's interests. And if I do, then I deal with it. She said it without drama. Not a threat, a fact she was presenting for context. He looked at her for a moment. "Sit down," he said. "You've been standing in operational posture for the last 30 seconds and it looks exhausting." She blinked. Sat down on the rooftop railing with the easy athleticism of someone for whom heights were comfortable. "You're not afraid of me." "Should I be? My partner has a holy sword. I have Durandal." She said it the way someone says I have a very large insurance policy. Most fallen angels respond to that information differently. "I'm mostly human," he said. "And I'm not going to hurt you, so the swords are relevant only if you decide to make them relevant." He looked at her steadily. "Your orders say assess, not act. So assess. Ask what you want to know." A pause. Something behind her eyes shifted, the operative's caution loosening slightly, replaced by something more genuine. What are your intentions toward the church? None, he said. I'm not from this world. I have no pre-existing position on the church or the angel faction. My interest is in stabilizing the three-faction balance and protecting the Gregori's people. A pause. Does that constitute a threat? The fallen king lineage is ancient enough that the church's institutional memory considers it an inherent threat regardless of the holder's intent. That sounds like a policy problem more than a practical problem. Her mouth twitched. Just slightly. It is, actually. She looked at him with frank assessment. What do you do? Specifically. The Dominion power. I make things more fully what they are, he said. Sacred energy gets clearer. Power structures stabilize. In a fight, I can redirect an opponent's power by making it recognize a different center. He paused. I'm still learning the edges of it. That's a terrifying power set to be learning the edges of, she said. I'm aware. He ate a bite of his lunch. What would it take for the church to classify me as a non-threat? Practically. What are the actual criteria? She looked at him with an expression that suggested this wasn't a question she'd been briefed for. I don't think anyone's considered the scenario where the fallen king just asked. I'm asking. I'd have to report back, she said. My brief was for assessment. I don't have the authority to open a formal position dialogue. That's fine, he said. Report what you saw. Tell them I sat on a rooftop and had lunch and asked them to tell me what they needed from me. He looked at her. That's a more useful piece of intelligence than a fight report. Zenobia was quiet for a moment, and the look she was giving him was the same look he'd been getting from everyone since he arrived, the recalibration, the slight widening of the frame through which they were viewing him. You're very strange, she said. Yes, he agreed. Are you enrolled here? The Vatican sent you undercover as a student? My partner Irina is already enrolled. I arrived separately. She paused. We're supposed to be gathering information without engaging the factions. How's that going? She looked at him for a beat. Then, with the particular deadpan of someone who only sounds like they're joking, you ate lunch with me. I'm going to have to write a very complicated report. He almost laughed. I'll make it easy, I'm cooperative, non-hostile, and willing to have this conversation again if the church wants to send someone with more authority. He stood up. Zenobia. I'm not the enemy. I'm also not an ally yet, because I don't know your organization well enough to be. But I'm willing to find out. She stood too, and looked at him with something that was mostly professional assessment and fractionally more personal. I'll include that, she said. Good. He picked up his lunch container. Try the cafeteria's katsu, it's better than it looks. He left her on the rooftop and went back down the stairs, and behind him he heard, after a moment, the soft sound of her following, not after him, just in from the rooftop, back into the building's ordinary hum. The afternoon class was interrupted. Not dramatically, it started with a vibration. Subtle enough that the human students didn't register it, but Izuku felt at the same moment Rias did, and their eyes met across the classroom for a clean half-second before both of them were processing the same information. Old Satan faction. Not subtle. Not tactical. Something designed to be felt. He was out of his seat before the teacher's sentence was finished, moving for the door with the smooth economy of someone for whom emergency exit is a reflex. Behind him he heard Rias making the excuse to the teacher, family emergency, smooth as water, and then the Gremory peerage was moving too, and in the hallway they met each other in the corridor outside the classroom, Izuku and Rias face to face, both of them knowing what was happening, neither of them having discussed what the protocol was for exactly this situation. Rias looked at him. Old Satan faction, she said. Not a probe. A statement. I felt 3 distinct energy signatures, he said. The third asset that didn't leave, they called in support. Where? He pointed. Southeast. The direction he'd felt the resonance spike from, dense and deliberate. She looked in that direction for a moment, then at him. This is Gremory territory. My jurisdiction. I know. But it's targeted at you. She met his eyes. Which means if I respond alone, they achieve the division they're aiming for. He looked back at her. Then we don't divide, he said simply. A beat. Something in her expression, the controlled Gremory era's surface, shifted slightly, and underneath it was something more direct. Less political. More like a person making a decision that mattered. Together, then, she said. Together, he agreed. Behind Rias, Aquino's eyes were lit at the edges, that fallen angel blood reaction, responding to the lineage resonance and the stakes simultaneously, and she looked at Izuku with something that had moved well past professional assessment and into territory she hadn't named yet but could feel clearly. Raynare came through the front entrance at a controlled run, phone in hand, Grigori intel already downloaded. She took the situation in a single sweep, Izuku, Rias, the Gremory peerage, the felt vibration from the southeast, and said, coordinates, to Izuku, who gave them, and then said to Rias, 3 confirmed old Satan operatives. Possibly a 4th. These are not scouts. I know what they are, Rias said, which she did. She'd grown up knowing what they were. The 5 of them moved out together, Izuku and Rias at the front, Raynare flanking, Aquino and the rest of the Gremory peerage spreading into their operational configuration, and walked into the afternoon like something about this had always been the plan. It hadn't. But sometimes the best plans were the ones that assembled themselves under pressure. Above them, the sky was still clear, and the afternoon was still ordinary, and 3 blocks southeast, something that wanted to tear apart the careful balance of 3 factions was waiting in the industrial district by the old river. Izuku's wings were compressed and folded tight and the green lightning under his skin was very quiet, saving itself. Waiting, like him, for the moment the conversation ended and everything else began. Chapter 4, All factions bleed. The industrial district by the old river had been derelict long enough that the city had stopped pretending to notice it. Chain-link fencing, gravel lots, buildings that had given up on their original purposes and were now just structures existing in the gap between demolition and redevelopment. The kind of place a city produces without meaning to, the geography of neglect. It was, Izuku noted as they came around the last corner, a very well-chosen battlefield. Open sightlines for ranged attacks. Multiple structural positions for ambush. The river at the far end cutting off one escape route. The fence lines creating corridors that funneled movement. Someone had thought about this space before bringing a fight to it, which told him what kind of enemy they were dealing with. Smart. Patient. Had been planning this since before he arrived in Kuo. The 3 old Satan faction operatives were standing in the open center of the largest gravel lot, which was either confidence or a trap, and after 2 seconds of looking at the spacing and the positions of the other 3 figures he could feel but not yet see, he was fairly sure it was both. The one in the center was a woman, tall, older, with the particular stillness of someone who has been doing violence professionally for long enough that it's become a resting state. She had gray wings, tight folded, and a pair of long swords that she held loosely, points slightly down, and she was looking at Izuku with an expression of professional evaluation that had something personal underneath it. Fallen King, she said. We've been waiting. I know, Izuku said. He stopped at the edge of the gravel lot, 10 meters out, with Rias on his left and Raynare on his right and the Gremory peerage spreading into their positions behind them. What's your name? A beat. She hadn't expected that either. They kept not expecting the direct questions, which meant the intelligence briefing they'd been working from had described someone who played power games with information. He wasn't that. Kalinda, she said, after a moment. Kalinda. You planned this carefully. He looked at the lot, the positions, the structures. The 4th asset in the building to the northwest. The 2 flankers by the river fence. You knew we'd come together, Gremory and Grigori both. You wanted us here at the same time. Rias made a small sound beside him, not surprise, but the specific acknowledgement of someone confirming a conclusion they'd already reached. They wanted witnesses, she said quietly, to him. They want a statement, he said back, equally quiet. They don't care about winning this fight. What do they care about? He looked at Kalinda. The woman had let him talk, let him work through it, with the patience of someone who was comfortable with the situation. Too comfortable. People with 3 to 7 odds in their favor and a prepared battlefield weren't this patient unless they were waiting for something specific. They want me to use the Dominion power publicly, he said. In front of both factions. They want a demonstration on the record that the fallen king is active and operating in the open. It removes the Grigori's ability to deny my existence through political channels and forces all 3 factions into a declared position. Raynare's voice was very controlled. That's a sophisticated play. It's a good one, he said honestly. Then, louder, to Kalinda, you're not here to kill me. No, Kalinda agreed pleasantly. Just to see what you are. And report it to whoever's backing you. Everyone reports to someone. She lifted both swords slightly. Shall we begin? Izuku looked at her for one more second, cataloging, finishing the calculation, locking the variables into their positions, and then said to Rias, don't engage the flankers unless they move first. Keep your peerage on the center. I'll handle the northwest. You'll, she stopped. The asset in the northwest building is a sniper position. I know. He looked at her sideways. Trust me for about 40 seconds. Her expression did the thing, that involuntary shift, the managed surface cracking on its edges. 40 seconds, she said. After that I make my own calls. Fair, he said, and moved. He didn't run toward the northwest building. He went straight up. The wings came out in the open air and the effect was immediate, not just visually, though the 12 black wings with their green lightning filling the sky above the gravel lot was not a subtle sight, but energetically, the lineage resonance expanding outward from him like a pressure wave as the wings fully extended. The flankers by the river fence both flinched. The 4th asset in the building made a sharp sound he heard clearly from 30 meters up. Kalinda, to her credit, didn't move at all. He folded 3 sets of wings and dove. Not for the building, he changed direction mid-drop, angular, reading the 4th asset's position from their energy signature, and came through the building's 2nd-story window in a controlled entry that scattered glass and timber framing and deposited him in a dust-filled space facing a man with a sniper configuration that was clearly designed to put something very unpleasant through him at the moment he extended his wings in the lot below. The man swung the weapon toward him. Izuku was already inside its minimum range. He didn't hit the man. He put his hand flat against the weapon's receiver and let the Dominion power run through it, just a pulse, just enough, and the sacred energy that had been loaded into the weapon's specialized ammunition recognized a new center and went dormant. The rounds that had been designed to punch through fallen angel energy shielding became inert. The weapon was still a physical object but the operational part of it was simply gone, drained back into the lineage resonance like water returning to its source. The sniper stared at his now inert weapon. Then at Izuku. Leave, Izuku said quietly. Tell them what you saw. That's what you're here for anyway. The man left through the stairs at a controlled pace that was trying very hard not to be a run. Izuku went back out the window and dropped into the lot. 38 seconds. Below him, Kalinda and the center operatives had engaged the Grimoire Peerage and Raynare, which was what they'd been waiting to do, and he could see in the first second of observation that Kalinda was good, was very good, moving between Rias and Aquino with the efficiency of someone who knew both their power sets well enough to avoid the dangerous parts. But she was also watching him come down. That was the tell. Her attention was split, managing the fight she was in while tracking the fight she'd designed this whole scenario around. She wanted him in it. She needed him to use the Dominion power in the open to complete the intelligence picture she'd come here to build. He landed at the edge of the engagement and folded his wings and watched for 5 seconds, which felt longer than it was. Rias was managing beautifully, her power of destruction was a deep crimson thing, carefully applied, precise rather than overwhelming, and she moved through the space with the intelligence of someone who fights the way she thinks, which was methodically and without wasted motion. Raynare was working the flankers, her light spears coordinated with a cold efficiency that was genuinely impressive. Akino was, he paused on this, Akino was extraordinary, and he watched her for a full 2 seconds longer than strategic necessity required because the lightning she worked with moved in patterns that his lineage resonance recognized, the fallen blood in her making her power resonate with his in a way that was visible to him like a harmonic in music. She caught him watching. In the middle of a fight. And her expression, despite everything happening around her, went briefly unguarded, startled, and then something warmer, and then she redirected a bolt of lightning at the closer flanker and the moment passed. Kalinda pressed Rias back 3 steps with a combination that bypassed the power of destruction's outer layer, using the sword's momentum rather than any energy discharge, and Rias's expression tightened, not panic, but the reassessment of someone recognizing they're in a real fight. Behind her, Kiba moved to cover. Izuku walked forward. Kalinda turned when he was 6 meters out, because she felt the resonance before she heard his footsteps, and she settled into a guard position with both swords in the defensive configuration of someone who has fought sacred energy users before and knows the geometry of it. "There it is," she said. "You went to a lot of trouble," he said. "Worth it, to see the 8th circle in person." She looked at him with genuine professional interest. "I've read the accounts. The dispersal. The lineage. The theory was always that if it crystallized again, the king would be a combatant of the highest order." She adjusted her grip. "I want to see if the theory was right." "You could just ask." "I'm asking," she said, and attacked. She was fast. Faster than he'd prepared for, which was information. The gray wings gave her a burst of aerial speed she hadn't used until now, cutting the distance between them and bringing both swords across in a crossing pattern designed for someone with energy shielding. He had energy shielding, but not of the type she was calibrated for, and the blades hit the outer edge of his resonance field and slowed, the way water slows when it hits a denser medium, not stopping but changing. He stepped inside the cross, put his right hand against her leading forearm, and ran the Dominion pulse through the contact point. It was the first time he'd used it in a real fight, and the effect surprised him too. The sacred energy in Kalinda's gray wings, in her operational power, turned toward him in the way iron filings turn toward a magnet, not taking from her but acknowledging a different structural center, and Kalinda's entire energy output went fractionally off-axis. Her coordination broke. Not severely, not disablingly, but enough. The second sword came across 2 centimeters lower than she'd intended, and that 2 centimeters was the gap he needed to step through and get behind her guard entirely. He didn't hit her. He stood inside her guard with his hand on her shoulder and said, very quietly, "Report what you saw. Tell them the fallen king is real and is not an asset they can control." He kept his voice entirely level. "And tell them if they send someone into Kuo again I won't be this patient." Kalinda was absolutely still. The energy in her was oriented toward him despite her obvious effort to resist it, and he could feel her professional composure running parallel calculations at high speed, tactical situation, escape options, what the intelligence picture looked like right now. Then she stepped back. He let her. She looked at him for a long moment, swords lowering, with an expression that had moved past professional evaluation into something more complex. "You're not what the briefing suggested," she said. "What did the briefing suggest?" "A weapon waiting to be aimed." She folded her swords. "You're something else." "Yes," he said. She looked at the lot around them, the Gremory peerage, Raynare, the 2 flankers who had both taken significant damage and were holding positions uncertainly. She made a small gesture and the flankers stood down. "Retreat," she said, to them and to herself equally. She looked back at Izuku one more time. "The people who sent me will not be satisfied with this report." "I know," he said. "I'm not trying to satisfy them. I'm trying to be clear." Kalinda almost smiled. Then she was in the air, wings open, moving south at speed, and the flankers followed, and in 15 seconds the lot was empty of old Satan faction presence and very full of the aftermath of a real fight: scorch marks, cracked gravel, one structural panel of the northwest building now short a window. The 6 of them stood in the lot as the dust settled. Rias was looking at him. He turned to find her already looking, and her expression was the most unmanaged he'd seen it, not the diplomatic heiress, not the faction leader, just Rias Gremory processing something that had gone significantly outside her operational projections. "You disarmed a senior old Satan cadre officer," she said. "Temporarily redirected her energy alignment," he said. "She'll have it back in an hour." "In 6 seconds, she said. "You did it in 6 seconds. He didn't have anything particularly useful to say to that, so he didn't say anything. Aquino drifted closer. She was still lit at the edges, the fallen blood reaction visible in the quality of the lightning around her hands that hadn't fully subsided, and she looked at him with an expression that was several things simultaneously and made no effort to be only one of them. "That was remarkable," she said. "I got lucky with the contact window," he said honestly. "She was better than I expected. If she'd known the Dominion power worked on touch rather than range, she wouldn't have let me get close." "You let her hit first so you could get inside her guard," Rias said. "Yes. You let an armed senior operative hit you to create an opening. It was a controlled risk. Your entire approach to conflict is controlled risks," she said, and there was something in her voice that wasn't quite frustration, closer to the feeling you get when you realize you've been thinking about a problem wrong and the correct approach has been obvious the whole time. "You don't fight the way fallen angels fight. You don't fight the way devils fight." She looked at him. "How do you fight?" "Like someone who started with nothing and had to make every variable count," he said simply. The lot was quiet around them. The river made its ordinary sound 40 meters away. Raynare was checking the flankers' last positions with methodical efficiency, cataloging, which was what she did after any operational event. Kiba was helping a miner cut on one of the other peerage members. Kaneko was sitting on a piece of debris eating something, with the complete calm of someone for whom this had been a mildly interesting afternoon. Rias walked toward him slowly, not in the operational configuration they'd been in 10 minutes ago, just walking, the way you walk toward someone you want to have a real conversation with. She stopped 2 meters away and looked at him with the most direct expression he'd seen from her. "You told her to report what she saw," she said. "You could have taken her. Or at minimum held her for interrogation. Why let her go?" "Because what she reports is more useful to me than anything I'd learn from interrogating her," he said. She saw the fallen king and the Gremory heiress operating together in the same space without conflict. She saw me decline to use lethal or destabilizing force when I had the opening. She saw me in possession of a power her employers can't control. He looked at Rias steadily. "The intelligence picture she brings back is worth more than anything else I could get from this situation." Rias held his gaze for a long moment. "You were thinking about the political implications during the fight." "I was thinking about them before the fight," he said. "That's why I let you think you had 40 seconds before I pulled back your jurisdiction." Something happened in her expression, quick and unguarded, and then managed back, but he caught it clearly. She was angry, and she was also, underneath the anger, something else entirely. "I told you this was my territory," she said. "And I operated entirely within the framework of the coalition you proposed," he said. "You said together. I took that to mean we were working toward the same outcome." He paused. "I should have communicated the plan before moving. That was a mistake and I'm acknowledging it." She stared at him. "You're apologizing for the communication failure, not for the decision." He held her gaze. "The outcome was good." "The outcome was good," she repeated, slowly, and he could hear her processing the whole thing, the anger, the acknowledgement, the apology that wasn't a capitulation, and underneath all of it the fact that he was right and she knew it. She exhaled. One controlled breath, and the Gremory heiress' composure resettled, but differently, less like armor now, more like clothing. "Fine," she said. But next time you communicate before you move. Next time, he agreed. And next time, she said, and there was something in her voice that was almost wry, almost warm, you might want to give me more than 40 seconds. I was mid-combination when you came down. You were handling it. I know I was handling it, she said, sharply and without apology, and he almost laughed because it was so genuinely and completely herself. The debrief happened in the Gremory clubroom that evening, and it was the first time all of them had been in the same space without a specific agenda driving the meeting. Raynare sat apart from the Gremory peerage with professional distance that was partly genuine and partly habit. She'd been operating as a solo or small unit operative for long enough that large group dynamics were uncomfortable for her, and the Gremory faction's easy familiarity with each other was a texture she didn't know how to join yet. Aquino brought tea without being asked, which was her way of managing the space, and set a cup near Raynare without comment, which was either an olive branch or a provocation, and from the careful neutrality of her expression was probably both. Raynare looked at the cup. Picked it up. Said nothing. Izuku watched this from the far couch where Rias was walking him through the intelligence file on the old Satan faction operative network, pointing at the map with a stylus and explaining the operational history with the focused efficiency of someone who took briefings seriously. He was listening, genuinely, he was taking in everything she said, because the intelligence was real and useful and he needed it. But he was also watching the room. Watching Raynare and Aquino in their careful parallel avoidance. Watching Kiba, who had a particular quality of loyalty that reminded him of the best kind of hero sidekick, earnest and entirely without calculation. Watching Kaneko, who was still eating and watching everything with eyes that missed nothing. Small, quiet, and he suspected considerably more dangerous than anyone who didn't know her would assume. You're doing it again, Rias said. What? Watching everyone. She wasn't accusatory. You do it constantly. Even when you're paying attention to me. I'm paying full attention to you, he said. And partial attention to the room. Both are possible. Most people aren't capable of both. I had a teacher who could track 20 simultaneous variables in a crisis and still hold a full conversation, he said. He had a very specific kind of attention. I learned it by watching him. What happened to him, she asked, and then immediately said, sorry. You don't have to answer that. He's alive, Izuku said. Retired. The last time I saw him he was smiling. He paused. Which was rare enough to be significant. She was quiet for a moment. You miss your world, she said. Not a question. Yes. He said it simply, without the performance of being fine. But missing it and being here aren't in conflict. Both are true. She looked at him with those blue-green eyes that were doing the thing they kept doing, holding him in their focus with an attention that had stopped being entirely analytical somewhere in the last 24 hours and hadn't announced when it made the shift. The old Satan faction will report to their coordination structure tonight, she said, pulling back to the map. We'll have 48 hours before their response is organized. Maybe more if the internal debate about what you represent slows them down. She tapped the map. Their next move will be larger. Agreed, he said. And targeted. They'll want to isolate either you or the Grigori before they move on me. Which means we don't let them isolate us. Which means we make the coalition visible, he said. Not just operational, visible. The three-faction agreement is currently theoretical. If we make it structural, embedded, harder to attack from the outside, you're proposing a formal inter-faction cooperation framework, she said. I'm proposing that the old Satan faction's next attack finds three factions already standing together instead of three factions reacting separately. He looked at her. Can you get the Angel faction to a table? She blinked. The Angel faction doesn't negotiate directly with fallen angels. I know. Can you? A beat. Possibly. Through Sona and the Citri household's diplomatic channel. She looked at the map and then at him, and the expression was the most honestly considering he'd seen from her. You're thinking 3 steps ahead of where everyone else is. 2 steps, he said. 3 would require information I don't have yet. She almost smiled. It got to the corner of her mouth before she pulled it back, but he saw it. I'll contact Sona, she said. Tonight. From across the room, Akino was watching them both with golden eyes that were warm and assessing and entirely aware of the specific texture of what was happening between them, what had been building since the first meeting in this room and had accelerated through a fight and a debrief into something neither of them had named but both of them could feel clearly. She said nothing. But she set her own tea down and smiled, a real smile, without performance, aimed at no one in particular. Raynare caught it from her position against the wall. Looked at Akino. Looked at the back of Izuku's head. Made a very small, very controlled expression that was almost rueful and sipped her tea. At 11 that night, Izuku was on the school building's rooftop when Azazel called. Report, Azazel said, without preamble. The line was secure enough that the word came through clean. Kalinda. Senior Old Satan operative. She took 3 field units into Kuo for a demonstration engagement. They wanted the Dominion power on the record. And I gave them a record. He looked at the city lights. Disarmed the sniper asset, used touch-range Dominion on Kalinda, let them leave with the intelligence picture they came to build. A pause on Azazel's end. You let them leave with it deliberately. Yes. Because the picture they're bringing back is, Fallen King is operational, is working in coalition with Gremory, does not fight to destroy, and cannot be controlled by force. He paused. The people running the old Satan faction's intelligence will spend the next 3 days arguing about what that means. That argument is time I can use. Silence for a moment. Then, you did this in your first real engagement. In your 4th day in this world. I had good data by day 2. Azazel made a sound that was close to a laugh but more like a long exhale of someone feeling something they didn't entirely expect. Shemhaze is going to want to meet you, he said. The whole council is going to want to meet you. I've been putting them off but after today, he stopped, I'll give you 2 more days before I bring them in. Use them well. I'm working on the 3-faction table, Izuku said. Rias is contacting Sona Citri tonight. A longer pause. You're proposing a formal tri-faction table. Preliminary, he said. Nothing binding. But visible. Something that makes the old Satan faction's next move a strike against a structure rather than a gap. In 4 days, Azazel said slowly, you've formalized the 8th Circle Throne, achieved a working coalition with the Gremory faction, successfully dissuaded a Vatican exorcist from a hostile assessment, and neutralized an old Satan demonstration action. Another pause. I want to be very clear that I am not surprised by any of this. You sound surprised, Izuku said. I am a little surprised, Azazel admitted. Not by the capability. By the speed. The lineage tests found the right person. Izuku was quiet for a moment. Below him the city was doing its late-night thing, the restaurants closing, the last trains running, the ordinary domestic pattern of a city that didn't know what was moving through it. Azazel, he said. What? What are you not telling me? A beat. Long enough to be meaningful. Several things, Azazel said, which is true of everyone in every situation. Specifically, there's a 3rd player who hasn't shown their hand yet. Not the angels. Not the old Satan faction. He paused. Something older. The texts mention it tangentially and I've been hoping my interpretation was wrong. Is it? Almost certainly not, Azazel said. But I need 2 more days to confirm. So get your table together. Build the coalition. And try to sleep occasionally. The line clicked. Izuku lowered the phone and looked at the sky. Clear, cold, the stars doing their ordinary stellar thing above a city that was full of extraordinary things living inside its ordinary shell. Behind him, the rooftop door opened. He turned. Raynare, in her jacket, carrying her own phone, which meant she'd been on a call too. She closed the door behind her and stood in the rooftop cold with her wings slightly open for warmth, which he'd noticed was a habit she had in cool air. "Grigori, debrief," he said. "Armoros," she said. "Assessment of today's operational output." She came to stand beside him at the rooftop edge, looking at the same city he'd been looking at. "She says you performed beyond projections." "What were the projections?" "That the old Satan faction would either capture or injure you severely in the first direct engagement and the Grigori would have to mount a rescue operation." She said it flatly. "Armoros bet on the rescue." "What did you bet?" A pause. "I didn't bet," she said. "I know that's not a satisfying answer. It's an honest one." He looked at the city. "Did you trust me to handle it?" She was quiet for long enough that he had his answer before she spoke. "I trusted that you'd find something," she said. "Not the same thing." He looked at her sideways. She was looking at the city, and in the ambient light her profile was sharp and a little tired, the professional composure present but thinner than usual, the end of a long day showing at its edges in the line of her jaw and the slight pull of her wings. "Raynare," he said. "What?" "You've been running full operational tempo since I arrived. You haven't had a break." "Fallen angels don't require," "I didn't say require," he said. "I said you haven't had one." He looked at her. "You've been managing my integration, liaising with Armoros, running the intelligence feeds, and apparently also personally covering my operational security every time I've moved in this city." A pause. "That's a significant amount of investment for someone you met 4 days ago." She was very still. The wings stopped their slight movement. "It's my assignment," she said. "It started as your assignment," he said gently. "I don't think that's still the only reason." The silence between them had a specific texture, not uncomfortable, not aggressive, something more like the quiet that exists right before a decision is made. She was feeling something and managing it the way she managed everything, which was to hold it at an arm's length and look at it critically before allowing it to be what it was. "You're perceptive to the point of being inconvenient," she said. "I've been told," he said. She looked at him then, turned, fully, and met his eyes with an expression that had stopped performing anything. Stripped back to what it actually was, someone with a bone that had healed wrong, standing next to someone who'd asked about it and hadn't flinched from the answer, and finding that the proximity felt less like exposure and more like, she didn't have a word for it yet. She'd get there. "Go to sleep, Midoriya," she said. But she didn't move. "You first," he said. She made a sound that was finally, unambiguously, a laugh. Small, surprised, pulled out of her without permission. She covered it quickly but not quickly enough and she knew it, and the knowing was in her expression when she looked away, a flash of something real and slightly embarrassed and unwilling to make more of itself than it was yet. "Good night," she said, and went to the door. "Good night," he said. She went down the stairs. He stood on the rooftop for another few minutes, looking at the city, listening to the last trains. Then he went down too, and the rooftop was empty and cold under the clear sky, and 3 blocks away in her own room in the old school building, Rias Gremory was on the phone with Sona Citri, proposing an unprecedented meeting, and across the whole city the night moved through its ordinary functions and the extraordinary things living inside it made their plans and felt their feelings and waited, as everything waits, for morning. From the northwest, something very old felt the lineage resonance pulse once in the dark and turned, slowly, in its direction. Not yet. But noting. It had patience built from centuries. A few more days was nothing. It noted the pulse and the location and the quality of what it felt, young, powerful, not yet fully understood by the one carrying it, and it marked all of these things and went back to waiting. Soon. Chapter 5, The Harem assembles 3 days after the Industrial District fight, Ko Academy held a cultural festival. Nobody had planned the timing. The universe had simply decided that the most absurd possible backdrop for a supernatural political realignment was a school festival with paper lanterns and a takoyaki stand and a class-haunted house that smelled like spray paint and nervous 16-year-olds. Izuku stood at the entrance to the school grounds in the morning light watching students string decorations between the buildings and thought, not for the first time, that this world had a very specific sense of humor. "You're going to have to participate," Raynare said from beside him, in the tone of someone reading a sentence from a document they find personally offensive. "I know," he said. "There's a booth assignment sheet. I saw it. You've been assigned to the class cafe." He looked at her. "So have you." She looked back at him. "I'm aware," she said flatly. Azazel thought it was funny. "He specifically arranged our booth assignment. He specifically arranged our booth assignment." She folded her arms. "He sent me a photograph of himself laughing." Izuku almost smiled. He turned back to the festival setup and watched a student nearly drop an enormous paper fish decoration and another student catch it, and the ordinary human comedy of the moment sat comfortably against the weight of everything else. Yesterday's intelligence briefing from Azazel had confirmed the third player, not identified yet, but measurably closer. The old Satan faction's coordination structure had gone quiet in a way that suggested they were being told to wait, which meant someone with more authority than Kalinda was now running their response. The tri-faction table was scheduled for 4 days from now. But today was the festival. "Come on," he said, and went inside. The class cafe ran on the principle that if you put students in vaguely themed costumes and charged slightly too much for coffee, people would show up. Izuku wore a dark apron over his uniform and took orders with the focused attention he brought to everything, which resulted in him being better at it than anyone expected and also resulted in a small queue of students who kept finding reasons to order a second drink. Raynare, in an identical apron, managed the preparation side with the efficiency of someone who had run small tactical operations in hostile territory and found a cafe mildly less challenging. She moved through the prep space with a clean economy of motion and an expression of someone doing a job, and she did the job extremely well, which was apparently her setting regardless of the task. Akino appeared at 10:30, not as a patron. She came behind the counter. The Gremory Peerage had their own booth, a fortune-telling setup that Izuku suspected was considerably more accurate than the sign suggested, and stood next to Raynare in the prep space and said, "I thought you might need help with volume." Raynare looked at her. "We're managing." "You're managing and looking like you'd prefer to be literally anywhere else," Akino said pleasantly. "Let me take prep. You can run the counter." A beat of silence during which Raynare clearly ran through the argument for refusing and found it less convincing than the argument for accepting. "Fine," she said, and moved to the counter. What followed was 2 hours of the most domestically bizarre situation Izuku had experienced in either world, running a cafe counter with a fallen angel who had been trying to kill a different human a week ago, while a half-fallen angel managed his prep station, while a devil princess appeared every 40 minutes to check on things under the cover of checking on things. Rias was not subtle about it. She came the first time with Kaneko, the second time alone, the third time with Kiba who very obviously didn't need to be there and was there as social cover. Each time she engaged Izuku in exactly the kind of conversation that had been building since their first meeting, direct, intelligent, occasionally sharp, with that undercurrent of something neither of them was naming that had been getting harder to ignore. The third visit, Kiba had been dispatched to get something from their booth and it was just her at the counter, leaning against it with a cup of coffee she didn't need and an expression she wasn't managing very hard. "How are you actually doing?" she asked. He looked up from the order he was processing. "Fine." "Why?" "Because you've been in this world for 8 days," she said, "and you haven't stopped moving since you arrived. You formalized a throne, engaged in active combat, proposed an interfaction summit, and enrolled in school." She looked at him. "Most people would need to breathe." "I breathe constantly," he said. "It's a habit I've maintained." She made a small sound that was almost exasperated and almost fond and entirely involuntary. "That's not what I meant." "I know what you meant." He passed the finished order across the counter and turned to face her fully. I'm okay. The power is stabilizing, the flickers are gone, the output is consistent. Azazel's intel on the third player is narrowing. The summit preparation is on track. He paused. And I'm in a school festival cafe, which is extremely normal, and I find that helpful. She looked at him for a moment. You find the normal things helpful? I grew up wanting to be a hero, he said. Heroes live in between the extraordinary moments. The ordinary things, school, cafes, lunch breaks, they're not interruptions to the real life. They are the real life. He held her gaze. Everything else is what happens to the real life. The thing that kept happening to her expression happened again. The surface shifted, and underneath it was Rias, not the heiress, not the faction leader, not the political entity, just a person who had been born into a world of extraordinary stakes and had perhaps forgotten what it felt like to treat the small things as real. She started, and stopped, and started again more quietly. That's a good way to think about it. It took me a while to learn it, he said. What taught you? Someone who had every reason to be bitter about everything ordinary in the world, he said, and wasn't. She looked at him for another moment with those blue-green eyes that held him in that full, unmanaged attention, and then Kiba came back, and the moment folded itself into the ongoing afternoon, but it didn't disappear. It settled into the accumulated texture of things between them that were building into something with a definite shape, and neither of them had yet put a name to. Lunchtime brought Seraphal Leviathan. Nobody had been warned. The four great Satan of the Devil faction simply appeared at the cafe counter in a modified school uniform she'd acquired somewhere, with twin pigtails and an energy that could only be described as weaponized cheerfulness, and said, I heard there was a fallen king here and I wanted to see for myself. Izuku stared at her. She stared back at him with the bright, assessing eyes of someone who was considerably more intelligent than their presentation suggested. You're Seraphal Leviathan, he said. You know who I am, she said, delighted. Azazel mentioned you. He called you, he paused, he said, and I'm quoting accurately, terrifyingly competent when she decides to be. Seraphal blinked. Then she laughed, a real one, genuine, surprised out of her. He never says that to my face. She leaned on the counter. Can I have coffee? And can you do the wing thing? My Sona-chan described the energy reading and I want to see. I'm not going to do the wing thing in a school festival cafe, he said. That's a very reasonable answer. She accepted the coffee. You're much calmer than I expected. Everyone said you'd be very intense. Who's everyone? Rias. She sipped the coffee. And Azazel, who described you as alarmingly self-possessed for someone who's been in this world for a week. Which from Azazel is basically a declaration of love. She studied him over the rim of the cup. The summit, Sona told me. 4 factions at a table. That's unprecedented. 3 factions, he said. Angel, Devil, Fallen. The old Satan faction isn't a recognized party. 4, she said, with a smile that had gone from cheerful to precise. You're the 4th. The 8th circle throne is its own seat. She tilted her head. Did Azazel not mention that? A beat. He did not mention that. Classic Azazel. She drank her coffee. The lineage throne predates all 3 factions as structured entities. It's older than the Great War. At a formal inter-faction summit, the fallen king sits as an equal party. She watched his expression. You didn't know. I'm learning, he said steadily. You're learning very fast. She put down the coffee cup. I came to see if you were real, she said, simply and without performance. Everything about you reads as too good, too cooperative, too intelligent, too well aligned with everyone's interests simultaneously. That kind of person is either genuine or running a very long game. Which do you think? He asked. She looked at him for a long, assessing moment. The cheerful surface was entirely absent, This was the terrifyingly competent version Azazel had described, looking at him with the focused intelligence of someone who had survived devil faction politics for centuries by reading people accurately. Genuine, she said. But shaped by something. The way a person is genuine because they've been through enough that performance would be too exhausting. She paused. Something happened to you. Before you came here. Something that made ordinary heroism insufficient. He held her gaze. Yes, he said. And the lineage power found that shape and crystallized around it, she said quietly. Not the power of someone who wants to conquer. The power of someone who needs to make sure things hold together. She picked up her coffee again. The old Satan faction is very afraid of you, you know. Not because you're strong. Because you make everyone around you harder to turn against each other. Is that a problem for you? He asked. For me. She smiled again, the real one, warm and genuine. I've been trying to get the factions to stop being stupid about each other for decades. You managed a working coalition in 4 days. She looked at him over the cup. You're my favorite thing to happen this century. From behind Izuku, Raynare made a very quiet sound that was too controlled to be laughter but was pointing in that direction. In the afternoon the festival's energy shifted, the competitive event started, the crowd density increased, and the whole operation got louder and more chaotic in the good way. Izuku slipped away from the booth during a natural lull and walked the grounds, because walking was how he processed things. He found Zenobia at the edge of the athletic field, watching the three-legged race with an expression of someone conducting fieldwork on a species they found interesting but puzzling. How's the report going? He said, sitting on the fence beside her. My superior sent back 14 clarifying questions, she said. 3 of them were about your emotional state during the cafe counter-conversation. Vatican intelligence is apparently very interested in whether you seem manipulable through personal connection. Am I? She looked at him. No, she said. You make connections genuinely and you care about people genuinely and you're also completely clear about what you're doing and why. Those aren't in conflict but they're unusual enough together that the Vatican doesn't have a category for it. She paused. Irina wants to meet you. Your partner. She's been watching you from a distance since you arrived and describing her observations to me in significant detail, Zenobia said, in the tone of someone who finds their partner's enthusiasm simultaneously endearing and overwhelming. She says you feel like a miracle. I told her that was theologically imprecise. What did she say? She said I was being annoying. Zenovia's mouth moved. She's usually right when she says that. He looked at the athletic field where the three-legged race was producing the specific joyful chaos of people who have tied themselves together and discovered the commitment level required. Zenobia. Your assessment report. Yes. Whatever you conclude, be accurate. Don't soften it toward favorable because you've spent time with me and don't harden it toward hostile because the institution expects threat assessment. He looked at her. An honest report serves everyone better than a managed one. She was quiet for a moment. The Church's institutional interests sometimes conflict with honest assessment, she said carefully. I know. I'm asking you to do it anyway. Another pause. You're asking me to potentially damage my relationship with my superiors to give you an accurate report. I'm asking you to be honest because accuracy matters, he said. Not for my sake. For everyone's sake. He looked at her. If the Church has wrong intelligence on me, they make bad decisions. Bad decisions lead to conflict nobody wants. An honest report prevents that. Zenobia looked at the race, then at him. Then she said, quietly and with the particular weight of someone making a decision that has been building for a while, I'm going to recommend peaceful status and open dialogue as the Church's official position toward the Eighth Circle throne. She paused. My superior is going to be unhappy about it. Will you be okay? Probably. She almost smiled. I have Durandal. That gives me a certain amount of institutional job security. He almost laughed. Fair enough. They sat on the fence for a comfortable few minutes watching the race, and Izuku thought that this was exactly what he'd meant to Rias about the ordinary things, this specific, human-scale comfort of sitting on a fence watching people tie themselves together and fall over. The world was full of things trying to tear apart, and here were people voluntarily attaching themselves to each other and running. There was something in that. There was always something in that. Asia Argento found him entirely by accident. She was lost. That was evident from the first second, small, blonde, in an exorcist's habit that she was clearly not comfortable wearing in a crowd, with large green eyes that were looking around the festival grounds with the expression of someone who had taken a wrong turn at the gymnasium and ended up somewhere they hadn't planned. She bumped directly into him. He caught her by the shoulder before she went down. She looked up at him and her expression went through several things quickly, startled, apologetic, and then something else, something that replaced all the other expressions with a stillness. "Oh," she said softly. "Are you okay?" he said. Yes. Sorry. I was looking for Zenobia." Her voice was gentle, accented, genuinely apologetic. Her eyes hadn't left his face. "You're him," she said. "You're the fallen king." "Midoriya Izuku," he said, letting go of her shoulder. "You must be Irina's partner." "Irina's? No, I'm Asia. Asia Argento." She looked at her feet briefly, then back up. I'm not officially part of the church's assessment mission. I came because Zenobia asked me to and I wanted to help." "What's your role?" "I have a sacred gear," she said, with the air of someone who has explained this before and watches people react to it. "Twilight healing. I can heal anyone, any faction. Angel, devil, fallen." She paused. "The church doesn't entirely approve of the anyone part." He looked at her for a moment. Small and earnest and clearly someone who had been made to feel like a problem because of something that was obviously and purely a gift. He recognized the shape of that very well. "That sounds like an extraordinary ability," he said simply. She blinked. "Most people say it's complicated." "It's only complicated to people who think some people shouldn't get healed," he said. "That's their problem, not yours." Asia stared at him. Her eyes had gone slightly bright, which he thought was probably not the moment for further conversation because he'd clearly hit something real and he didn't want to push it in the middle of a school festival. "Zenobia is by the athletic field," he said. "East side, sitting on the fence." "Thank you," she said, soft and genuine. She took 2 steps and then turned back. "Midoriya-san. The things Zenobia said about you in her report drafts," she hesitated, "they were all true. I could tell when she was trying to find the words for you." "I hope the words were accurate," he said. "They were kind," she said, "and accurate," and went east toward the athletic field, and he stood for a moment in the flow of the festival crowd and felt the texture of this world pressing against him in all its complicated, layered, very human humanity. He found Rosweiss at the cultural exhibition booth, which was staffed by the school faculty and featured historical artifacts displayed with the specific agony of someone who knows too much about everything being presented. She was a young Norse Valkyrie who had, through a series of circumstances Azazel had explained to him with great amusement, ended up as a teacher at Kuo Academy, and she was standing in front of a display about medieval European history with an expression of barely contained agony. "That date is wrong," she said, when he stopped beside her. He looked at the display. "By how much?" 40 years. "And the context is, the trade routes described here would have been impassable in that period due to," she stopped. Looked at him. "Sorry. I'm not, you're Midoriya-san. The transfer student. A beat. And also the fallen king. Azazel told me you'd be here." "Of course he did," Izuku said. "You're Rosweiss-sensei." "Rosweiss, please." "The sensei is," she made a gesture. "It's a recent development. I was a Valkyrie until recently. Odin left me behind on a diplomatic trip and I've been navigating the fallout." She said it with a remarkably even tone for someone describing being abandoned by a Norse deity. "I'm sorry," he said. "That's genuinely terrible." "It is," she agreed, with the straightforwardness of someone who doesn't have the energy to pretend otherwise. "But Rias Gremory offered me employment and somewhere to be, and I've been doing my best with it." She looked at the wrong date on the display. "I'm significantly overqualified for the history curriculum, but the pay is reasonable." He liked her immediately. There was something clean about her, no performance, no agenda, just a competent person doing their honest best with a situation they hadn't planned for. He understood that orientation deeply. "The summit in 4 days," he said. "Azazel mentioned you have diplomatic experience." "Extensive," she said. "Odin's court required a significant amount of managing." She looked at him. "Are you asking for help?" "I'm asking if you'd be willing to advise. You know the interfaction diplomatic history better than anyone I've met. The summit is unprecedented, and the last thing I need is to make a procedural error that gives someone grounds to withdraw." She studied him for a moment with the focused attention of someone who is very good at identifying whether people are sincere. "You're worried about the details," she said. "The details are where things fall apart," he said. "Battles I can handle. Protocol is harder." She looked at the display for a moment. "The date is 40 years wrong," she said again. "But the broader context is mostly accurate." She turned to him. "I'll advise. Bring me the current summit framework document tonight and I'll mark every procedural vulnerability." "Thank you," he said. "Don't thank me yet," she said. Azazel's people are notoriously casual about formal procedure, and some of the notation in his drafts made me physically uncomfortable when I reviewed them for the Grigori Council last year. She paused. "Do you know how to properly execute a trifaction accord clause?" "No," he said honestly. "We're going to spend several hours on that," she said, and there was something in her expression that was relieved, the relief of someone who has been very competent in a small space and has been offered a context where that competence is actually needed. Late afternoon, the festival was winding down. The paper lanterns had been lit, giving the school grounds a warm amber glow that made everything look like the last page of something good. Students were cleaning up, packing away, the particular bittersweet energy of the end of an event settling into the air. Izuku was on the school roof again. It had become his thinking place, this particular patch of elevated ordinary, when he heard multiple sets of footsteps on the stairs. He turned. Rias came through the door first. Then Aquino. Then, after a slight pause that suggested they'd been slightly arguing about the order, Raynare. Then Serafal, who had apparently decided the summit planning meeting was happening now regardless of venue. Then Asia and Zenobia together, with Asia looking slightly bewildered at the escalation of events and Zenobia looking like someone who has decided to see something through. Rossweiss appeared last, with a tablet and an expression of professional purpose. They spread across the rooftop and Izuku looked at all of them in the amber lantern light and felt something he hadn't felt since the UA dorm building late at night, the specific gravity of people who have chosen to be in the same place, not because they were assigned there but because they'd each made a separate decision that led to the same rooftop. Serafal sat on the railing with her feet dangling and her coffee. She had apparently gone back to the cafe for another cup, and said, "Is this the part where you tell us what you're planning?" "It was supposed to be a solo debrief," he said. "Plans change," Rias said, from the wall where she'd taken up position, arms loosely folded. Her expression was the most relaxed he'd seen it. The festival had done something to the managed surface, softened it, made it more like her. "What do you need from each of us for the summit?" He looked at them. Each of them had come here by a different route, different factions, different histories, different specific reasons, and each of them was looking at him with different things in their expressions. Serafal with bright, intelligent assessment. Rias with that unmanaged attention that had stopped being purely political somewhere in the last 3 days. Aquino with the warm, particular focus that had been building since the industrial district fight. Raynare with her careful, real honesty that she didn't give easily and had been giving him since the first night in the Grigori facility. Zenobia with the directness of someone who has made a decision and is standing by it. Asia with a gentle openness that was its own kind of strength. Rosweiss with her competent, grounded pragmatism. Rosweiss has the procedural framework, he said, starting to work because working was what he did. She'll need to walk all of us through the formal requirements before the summit. Rias, your diplomatic channel with Sona Citri is the primary Angel faction access point. I need you to manage that relationship through to the table. Seraphal, you're representing the Devil faction's Lucifer seat at the summit, which means your presence itself is a statement. I need you visible and aligned before the other old Satan faction sympathizers can suggest the summit doesn't have proper Devil authority. He looked at Raynare. Azazel's council needs to be briefed on the full situation tonight. I know Armoros has been managing the information flow, but after today's visibility the council deserves the complete picture. I'll handle it, Raynare said. Zenobia and Asia, your presence at the summit as church observers gives the Angel faction cover to engage without feeling like they're unilaterally breaking the no direct negotiation with Fallen protocol. You'd be there as witnesses, not parties. Zenobia nodded once. Asia was looking at him with those wide green eyes and something in them that was quietly stunned, the expression of someone who has spent their life being told what they are and has just encountered someone who asked them what they could do instead. Aquino, he said. She looked at him. The fallen blood reaction had been a low warm hum all afternoon, consistent with proximity, consistent with the lineage resonance, consistent with what Raynare had said about fallen recognizing something they'd been missing. Your thunderclap at the industrial district, he said. The way you work lightning, it's the most naturally compatible power I've seen with the lineage resonance. If the summit goes wrong and we need an operational response, your lightning and my resonance working in tandem would give us a response capability that none of the faction opponents are prepared for. She held his gaze with an expression that was warm and also more than that and also entirely honest about being more than that. Understood, she said, and the word carried a weight of acceptance that was about more than operational alliance. Rias was watching this exchange with the expression of someone who is very good at understanding things and is currently understanding several things simultaneously and has decided to be honest with herself about all of them. There's something else, Izuku said. Azazel mentioned a third player. Something older than the current factions. He's confirmed it but hasn't identified it yet. He looked at all of them. Whatever it is, it's been feeling out the lineage resonance from a distance. The summit is the right move strategically, but it also creates a visible moment, all four factions at a table, all the major power signatures in one place. He paused. I want everyone to understand that the summit is also bait. Silence on the rooftop. The lantern light moved slightly in the evening breeze. Bait, Seraphal repeated. The third player has been patient because it's been assessing the situation. Once the summit happens, once the coalition is visible and formal, it's going to have to make a decision. Move early before the structure is solid, or wait until after and deal with something much harder to break. He looked at the city below. I want to be ready for either. The summit builds the structure and draws out the timing. 2 objectives in one event. Another silence. Then Rias said, very quietly, you said this would be bait from the beginning. From the moment Azazel told me about the third player, he said. Yes. You didn't say anything. I needed to know if the summit would hold together on its own merits before I complicated it with secondary objectives, he said. Now I know it will. He looked at her. That's why I'm saying it now. Not before. She looked at him for a long moment. The amber light was warm on her face and her expression was doing the thing, the managed surface and the real thing underneath it and the particular quality of her attention on him that had been building since the first meeting. You manage information very carefully, she said. It wasn't an accusation. I grew up surrounded by people who shared everything and people who shared nothing, he said. I learned the value of timing. Is there anything else you haven't told me yet? The question landed differently than she intended, or differently than she intended to show, because there was something in it that wasn't just about the summit and they both knew it. Several things, he said, that have nothing to do with the summit. He held her gaze. When the summit is done. Whatever that meant, and it meant something specific and they both knew what it meant, Rias held his gaze for a 3 count and then said, when the summit is done, in the same register, and turned back to Rosweiss and the procedural framework. From the railing, Sarah Fall was watching this exchange with the expression of someone watching an extremely satisfying piece of theater. She caught Izuku's eye and mouthed, "Cute," and pointed at Rias. He deliberately looked away. Behind him, very close to his left shoulder, Akino murmured, "She's been like this for 3 days," in a tone of fond exasperation, and he felt her fallen blood resonate against his lineage for a warm brief moment. And from the far side of the rooftop, Raynare was looking at the city with her arms folded and her wings slightly open for warmth, and she was not looking at Izuku, but the line of her shoulders was less defended than usual, and the expression on her profile, caught in the amber light when she thought no one was watching, was the most unguarded thing he'd seen from her yet. Not the bone-healed wrong. Something better than that. Something that was learning to put weight on the healing. Later, when the others had gone down to continue the planning or home to their own preparations, he and Raynare were the last on the rooftop. This had become a pattern, the two of them at the end of things, in the quiet. 8 days, she said. Since I landed in the alley, he said. Yes. You've changed everything in 8 days. The situation changed, he said. I moved with it. She looked at him. Don't do that, she said. Do what? Minimize it. Her voice was level but direct. You make your own changes and you minimize them and you focus on the process instead of acknowledging the result, and it's a habit that, she stopped. It's a habit I recognize, she said, more quietly. Because I do it too. He looked at her. I don't know what I wanted badly enough to fall, she said. I told you that in the air, the first night. She was looking at the city. I've been thinking about it since. Since you arrived. A pause. I think maybe I wanted something real. Something that wasn't just function. Just being useful. Just being the thing I was shaped to be. She exhaled. And I've been doing the same thing since I felt that I was doing before. Being the function. Being the operative. She paused. Until you landed in the alley and asked me why I fell and didn't flinch from the answer. He didn't say anything. This was the kind of moment that words could destroy. I chose to report you, she said. I could have made a different call. I could have decided you were too complicated and let you go and reported a clean patrol. Her voice was very steady. I chose to bring you in because I wanted to see what you were. That was a personal choice, not an operational one. She looked at him. I'm not good at personal choices. I'm not sure I trust them. You brought me to Azazel, he said quietly. You spent 8 days running logistics for someone else's situation when it wasn't your assignment. You told me the truth about your fall when you didn't have to. You laughed on this rooftop last night when you didn't want to. He held her gaze. Those are all personal choices. You're better at them than you think. She was quiet for a long moment. The city was fully dark now, the amber festival lanterns below them the only warm light in the cold air. I'm not going to say something sentimental, she said. I know, he said. I'm just noting, she said, that I don't hate this. Any of this. She gestured vaguely at the rooftop, the city, him. I don't hate it. From Raynare, who had arrived in his life with a light spear aimed at his head, that was the most significant thing she'd said yet. He treated it as such, not making more of it than it was, not less. Good, he said. She nodded once. Good, she agreed. They stood in the cold for another few comfortable minutes, and then went down together, and the rooftop was empty under the clear cold sky, and the festival lanterns below were going out one by one as the evening ended and the city settled into its ordinary night. In the school building, the summit framework was being built in real time. Rossweiss and Rias on the documents, Serafall on the communication channels, all of it moving toward the table in 4 days. In the northwest, the ancient thing that had been patient for centuries felt the lineage pulse and the coalition energy and measured it all with the precision of something that had been doing this for a very long time. It was close now. Close enough that patience was almost exhausted. Almost. Chapter 6, Wings Over Every Heaven. The summit venue was a neutral location, an old estate in the hills outside Kuo that had been owned by a succession of supernatural parties for 3 centuries, changing hands through agreements rather than violence, with the specific understanding that the building itself belonged to no faction. The rooms were large, the ceilings high, and the stone walls had absorbed enough formal history that they carried the particular weight of places where things had been decided. Rossweiss had approved the venue after 40 minutes of structural assessment that nobody else had needed to perform, but everyone was grateful she had. She'd found 2 procedural vulnerabilities in the room arrangement, 3 in the seating configuration that would have implied rank hierarchy in ways that could have been weaponized, and 1 genuine security gap in the eastern wing that the Grigori's advance team sealed before dawn. Izuku arrived early. Not strategically. He'd simply woken at 4 in the morning with the lineage resonance running at a frequency he hadn't felt before. Not higher than usual. Different. The way weather pressure changes before a storm, the change itself invisible but the body's response to it unmistakable. He stood in the estate's central hall as the dawn came through the high windows and turned the stone floor from gray to gold, and he felt the third player like a pressure at the edge of a system, organized, focused, very close. Azazel arrived an hour later and looked at Izuku's expression and said, "Today?" "Yes," Izuku said. "During the summit?" "Probably. They want the maximum disruption for minimum investment. All 4 factions in one place, the coalition structure not yet formalized, the documents and signed. If they move before we sign, there's no structure to attack. Just a building full of people." Azazel was quiet for a moment. "I've confirmed the identity," he said. "The third player." He set his tablet on the stone bench beside the door and pulled up a file, a name, a history, a photograph that showed someone who looked like a middle-aged academic and was, by Azazel's assessment, one of the most dangerous entities currently operating outside the 3-faction framework. Zephyron. An original fallen cadre member who had not dispersed, who had instead gone dormant, deep and cold, in the dimensional margins while the world reorganized itself around the 3-faction agreement. Not dead. Not sleeping. Waiting, with the patience of something that had decided the right moment to reassert itself was when the lineage throne was occupied again and the occupant was still learning what they were. "He wants the throne," Azazel said. "Not to sit in it. To absorb it. He was the second strongest of the original cadre, the lineage you're carrying belonged to the one above him. The one who dispersed rather than fall under the 3-faction structure." He looked at Izuku. "If he absorbs the crystallized lineage essence through you, he becomes functionally unkillable by any single faction." Izuku looked at the photograph for a moment. The academic face, the careful eyes. "He's been feeling out the resonance for days. Since the first pulse in the courtyard," Azazel said. "Which means he's had time to watch how you operate." He paused. "Midoriya. He's going to know you, going into this. He'll have a complete intelligence picture on your relationships, your power application, your tactical patterns." He held Izuku's gaze. "He'll use every connection you've built as a lever. That's how he operates. He doesn't break things directly. He makes things break each other." Izuku looked at the golden light on the stone floor. "When does he move?" "When the summit is deepest in its process. When everyone's attention is on the table." Azazel paused. "I'm sorry I didn't identify him faster." "You got me the information before he moved," Izuku said. "That's what matters." Azazel looked at him for a moment. "Most people would be frightened." "I am frightened," Izuku said. "I'm also ready. Those aren't mutually exclusive." Azazel picked up his tablet. "What do you need?" Tell everyone separately, Izuku said. Give each person exactly the information relevant to their role. Don't convene a group briefing. If Zephyron has surveillance on the venue, a group briefing signals that we know. He thought for a moment. The summit proceeds as planned. We don't change anything. He needs to believe we don't know until the moment we do. And when that moment comes? Izuku looked at the door. Through it, the estate grounds, and beyond them the hills, and somewhere in the dimensional margins just beyond the visible, a 12,000-year-old entity that had been patient for longer than most civilizations had existed and was now almost done being patient. When that moment comes, he said, I'll need everyone to hold their positions regardless of what he shows them. Azazel looked at him steadily. What do you mean, shows them? He makes things break each other, Izuku said. Which means he'll create something, an image, a revelation, a manufactured moment, designed to make each person act against someone else in the room. He looked at Azazel. Whatever anyone sees during his attack, tell them to look for me first before they react. A long pause. You're going to absorb the attack. I'm going to give it a different center, Izuku said. There's a difference. Azazel exhaled. You understand that what the lineage says about absorbing a cadre-level attack is, I've read the texts, Izuku said. The survival rate described in the texts is, I've read the texts, he said again, steadily. Azazel was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, you are without question the most stubborn vessel this lineage has ever chosen. I'll take that as a compliment, Izuku said. It was, Azazel said, and went to begin the individual briefings. The Devil faction arrived at 9. Rias came first, with Akino and Kiba flanking, and Seraphal behind them with her cheerful surface precisely calibrated and her eyes doing the intelligent assessing sweep of someone who had been told something important and was recalibrating their approach. She caught Izuku's eye across the hall entrance and gave him one small nod that meant understood and ready, and then went back to being brightly casual. The Angel faction's representatives arrived at 9:15, 2 seraphs, formal and precise, with the particular discomfort of entities that have come to a table with Fallen and are managing the institutional resistance to doing so. Behind them, Sona Citri in her capacity as diplomatic intermediary, and behind her, at the back of the Angel delegation, Irina Shidu with her hand half raised in a wave at Asia that she brought down quickly when she remembered where she was. Izuku greeted each delegation at the door. Not because it was his job, Rossweiss had the formal greeting protocol covered, but because he wanted to stand at the entrance and be visible to anyone approaching. He wanted his energy signature at the threshold, active, present, oriented outward. He was holding a position. Making himself the point that everything would route through when the moment came. The seraphs paused when they reached him. The senior one, Griselda Quarta, he'd been told, Zenovia's former guardian, looked at him with an expression that was working very hard to be neutral. Fallen King, she said. Griselda-san, he said. Thank you for coming. The table needs your presence to be real. Not just technically, actually real. She looked at him for a moment. Something moved behind her formal composure. You are not what I was briefed to expect. I hope that's useful information, he said. A beat. Then, with the fractional thaw of someone's institutional caution yielding slightly to their actual judgment, it may be, she said, and went inside. Raynare appeared at his shoulder as the last of the delegations filed in. Zephyron's signature is at the eastern perimeter, she said, very quietly. He arrived 30 minutes ago. He's not moving. He's watching the arrivals, Izuku said. Counting who's in the room. Her voice was absolutely steady. He'd told her everything, more than everyone else, because she was the one he trusted most with the complete picture, and she had processed it all with the characteristic Raynare response of becoming very still and very precise. Are you certain about the absorption approach? No, he said honestly. Good, she said. Certainty about something that dangerous would be concerning. A pause. Midoriya. What? Don't die, she said, in the flattest possible tone, with all the feeling in the world running underneath it. "That's the plan," he said. "I mean it specifically," she said. "Not as a general strategic objective." He looked at her. "I know," he said. "I mean it specifically too." She held his gaze for one moment. Then she turned and went inside, and Izuku stood at the door alone for a moment with the morning light behind him and the summit ahead of him and Zephyron somewhere at the eastern perimeter doing the math. He walked inside. The summit table was the shape of things that mattered, round, no head, every seat equivalent, which Rossweiss had insisted on and which had prompted a 20-minute debate from the Angel delegation's junior representative that Sona Citri had resolved with a single look that Izuku found genuinely impressive. Rias sat across from the Angel delegation with the composure of someone who was managing a lifelong institutional tension and doing it well. Serafal was beside her, deceptively casual. Aquino sat at Rias's right, and Izuku watched her manage the fallen blood reaction to the angel energy across the table with a control that was clearly costing her effort. He took his seat, the fourth seat, the lineage throne's position, between Rias and the empty chair that Azazel had deliberately left between the fallen delegation and the devil delegation as a buffer space. Old diplomatic protocol, Rossweiss had explained. He sat in it and let his resonance settle, and the energy in the room, for factions worth of ancient opposing alignments, organized slightly around that settling. Like the room exhaled. Griselda Quarta noticed. Her eyes moved to him briefly and then away, but something in her posture changed, less resistant, more present. The summit began. Rossweiss opened the formal proceedings with the procedural precision of someone who had been waiting for a room worthy of her preparation, and it was immediately clear why she'd been so valuable to the planning process. She managed the session with the calm authority of someone who had navigated Odin's court, which meant she'd dealt with considerably worse table dynamics than this, and the first 40 minutes moved with the specific productive momentum of people who had each decided to try. Izuku watched everything. Contributed when relevant, stayed quiet when not, let the others speak because they had histories and relationships with each other that predated him and were important to the actual structure being built. When Griselda raised a procedural objection to a clause that had Serafal's name on it, he pointed out the precedent from a 400-year-old secondary accord that Rossweiss had given him at midnight, and the objection dissolved. When the junior angel representative tried to insert language that would effectively classify the Eighth Circle throne as a subordinate party to the angel faction, he waited until Griselda herself noticed the overreach and corrected it, which meant the correction came from inside the angel delegation and cost him nothing while establishing goodwill. Rias caught him not intervening on that one and looked at him with an expression that said she'd seen exactly what he'd done and was filing it away. He was on his fourth page of notes when the resonance shifted. Not gradually. All at once, the way lightning changes the quality of air in the instant before the strike. The lineage power in his chest went from its settled morning frequency to something alert and directional, oriented east, and he looked up from his notes at the same moment that Aquino's hand flattened against the table and Raynare, standing against the east wall, went very still. "Keep going," he said, quietly, to Rossweiss. She looked at him for a fraction of a second, registered his expression, and kept going. Zephyron moved at 11:43. He didn't come through the walls. He came through the quality of the light. One moment the morning light was ordinary, amber, clean, falling through the high windows in the diagonal way of late autumn mornings. The next moment it was different. Same light, different quality, like a filter had been applied to reality itself, and in the difference was a presence, enormous, ancient, patient as geological time, and now done being patient. A figure coalesced at the edge of the room without entering through any door. Tall, with the look of someone who had assembled a human appearance from memory rather than experience, and wings, massive gray things, 10 of them, that filled the upper third of the room's space with an energy so old and dense that it pressed against everyone in the room simultaneously. Not attack. Pressure. The first move in Zephyron's style, Izuku understood immediately, make everyone feel the weight of him before he does anything specific. Let the ancient power speak for itself. Let people make the mistake of reacting to the size before they understand the direction. Several people did react. The junior angel representative stood sharply, reaching for his weapon. One of the Grigori operatives by the door manifested a defensive barrier. Across the table, the angel delegation's energy surged in the instinctive way of beings whose power was built for exactly this kind of opposition. "Hold," Izuku said. Not loud. Not commanding in the performed sense. Just very clear, and the lineage resonance carried it. His voice ran on the power's frequency and the room heard it at the level below sound, the level where the body responds before the mind decides. Everyone held. Zephyron looked at him. The assembled face was performing calm, performing the satisfaction of the predator that has come to a prepared position, but behind it was something that had been dormant for a long time and was now awake and hungry in a way that 12 centuries of patience had made very specific. "The vessel," he said. His voice had harmonics in it, multiple layers, the assembled present voice and something older underneath it, like hearing a person and their echo simultaneously. "You feel more finished than I expected for someone so young." "Thank you," Izuku said. "Sit down if you want to talk." A pause. The performance of calm flickered slightly. "You're not afraid." "I'm afraid," Izuku said. "I told you, I mean it specifically. Sit down or don't, but tell me what you want first." Zephyron looked at the table. At each person around it. Izuku watched him do it, watching the ancient intelligence assess the room's configuration, the power positions, the relationships. Looking for the levers. Identifying which connection, when pulled, would produce the most useful fracture. Then Zephyron smiled, and the smile was the worst thing in the room, because it was the smile of someone who had found what they were looking for. He looked at Raynare. "Raynare," he said. "You found the vessel. You brought him to Azazel." The harmonics in his voice sharpened. "Do you know why?" She said nothing. "The lineage essence didn't just scatter randomly," Zephyron said. "The dispersal was guided. The Eighth Circle Lord left markers, compulsions woven into specific bloodlines. Fallen angels descended from certain lineages were given an imperative, written into their nature: find the vessel. Bring it home." He looked at Raynare with the expression of someone delivering a gift wrapped in poison. "You didn't choose him, Raynare. You were built to find him. Every feeling you think you chose, every personal decision you believe you made, it was written in your bones before you were born." The room was absolutely still. Izuku looked at Raynare. She was very, very still. The professional composure was up and it was doing everything it was designed to do, containing, suppressing, giving nothing away, but underneath it, in the quality of her stillness, was the specific kind of shock that comes when something touches a fear you didn't know you had until the exact moment it was weaponized against you. The thing she'd feared since she fell. The thing that made the fall the worst version of the answer: "I don't remember what I wanted." What if she'd never wanted anything? What if every choice she thought was hers had been a mechanism? Rias was already looking at Izuku, her expression calculating the moment. Should she speak, should she challenge, what was the right response? Akino's hand had come off the table. Izuku looked at Raynare. Not around her. At her. He waited until her eyes came to his, because they would. She couldn't hold the stillness indefinitely and she would look for something real and his was the face she'd look for, and when they came, "Do you remember," he said quietly, "making the call not to report me initially? Thinking about it. Choosing." Her jaw was very tight. "I know you remember it," he said. "You told me. You said you could have let me go. You said it was a personal choice, not an operational one." He held her gaze. "That moment is real. Whatever he says about compulsion, whatever is or isn't written in your lineage, that moment existed. You were in it. It was yours." She stared at him. "A mechanism doesn't wonder," he said. "You wondered. That's yours." Zephyron's smile had frozen slightly. He'd expected the lever to work faster, expected the fracture to begin opening before the vessel responded. He recalibrated and turned to Rias. Rias Gremory, he said. You've been building toward him since the first meeting. The heiress of Gremory, daughter of one of the oldest devil houses, finding herself increasingly unable to treat this boy as anything other than, the harmonics sharpened, almost mockingly warm, someone she wants. Do you know what the dominion power does at its deepest level? It doesn't just structure sacred energy. It structures people. Everyone in his sphere becomes more fully what they are, which means whatever feeling they have becomes amplified, clarified, made more real than it would naturally be. He looked at Rias with the patience of someone delivering a well-prepared argument. You haven't chosen him. He's been amplifying you toward him. Every meeting. Every conversation. Every moment you felt something real, it was his power making it louder than it would be without him. Rias was very still. The color of her hair was vivid in the altered light, and her expression was running through something, the calculation, the self-assessment, the particular vulnerability of someone being told that the most genuine feeling they've recently had was manufactured. Izuku watched her face carefully. Rias, he said. She looked at him. He's right about what the dominion power does, he said. It amplifies what's there. Makes things more fully what they are. He held her gaze. It cannot create something from nothing. If he's right, if the power amplified what you felt, then what it amplified was real. It was already there. He paused. The feeling is yours. The power just made it harder to argue yourself out of. Zephyron's harmonics deepened, a note of frustration entering the ancient layers. He turned wider, sweeping the room, looking for the lever that would hold. He turned to Aquino. Half-blood, he said. Your fallen heritage has been responding to him since he arrived. You know what that response is? It's not feeling. It's recognition. The fallen blood recognizes the lineage throne the way a compass recognizes north. You've been pointed at him since the moment you felt him from Kuo. He looked at her with the specific cruelty of someone twisting something genuine. What you think is personal is mechanical. You're a compass reading, not a person choosing. Aquino looked at Zephyron with golden eyes that had gone fully lit, not with the fallen blood reaction, but with something Izuku recognized because he'd seen it in Rias's eyes and Raynare's, and it was the look people got when something true was being used as a weapon and they were deciding whether to let it land. Zephyron, she said. Her voice was very calm. I know exactly what my fallen blood does. I've spent my entire life knowing what it is and being afraid of it. She held his gaze and the lightning around her hands was very quiet, very controlled, very deliberate. When Midoriya-kun looked at my power in the industrial district and said it was remarkable, not complicated, not dangerous, not a problem, that response was mine. Something settled in her expression, warm and clear and without apology. The compass points north. I still decide whether to walk. Zephyron stared at her for a moment. The ancient harmonics went very quiet. Then he changed tactics entirely. The light in the room went from altered to wrong, the pressure of his presence suddenly multiplying, the 10 wings opening fully in the enclosed space, the energy radiating from him shifting from passive weight to active force. The temperature dropped 4 degrees in 2 seconds. The summit documents on the table moved, edges rattling in a wind that had no physical source. Enough, he said, and the word was a force. The vessel comes with me. The lineage is not his to carry. It belongs to the cadre. It belongs to the old order. The 3-faction agreement is a cage and the power in that boy is the key to breaking it open. He looked at Izuku with 12,000 years of certainty in his ancient eyes. I was second to him once. I will not be second to his vessel. Izuku stood up. He did it slowly, and everyone in the room felt the shift, the dominion resonance coming up from its settled frequency to something operational, the 12 wings pressing against compression, the green lightning moving from the low hum of presence to the acute clarity of intent. You were second to someone who dispersed rather than dominate, Izuku said. You've been trying to understand that decision for 12 centuries. Zephyron's expression changed. For the first time, the first genuine crack in the ancient composure. Don't pretend you understand, he didn't want to be first, Izuku said. That wasn't the desire. It was something else. Something that didn't fit in the old order's categories. He walked around the table slowly, toward the center of the room, toward Zephyron, and the wings came out, 12 of them, fully extended in the estate hall's high space, the green lightning running their length in full active current, the black surfaces catching the wrong light and giving it back changed. He scattered because the only thing he cared about was the thing he wanted, and what he wanted couldn't exist in a world that was only divided into first and second, dominant and subordinate. Zephyron stared at him. The ancient eyes, behind the assembled face, behind the centuries of patience, were doing something they probably hadn't done in a very long time. They were uncertain. What did he want? Zephyron said. And the harmonics were gone from the voice. It was just a voice. Old and uncertain. I never understood. I tried for centuries to understand. Something worth protecting, Izuku said simply. Not an empire. Not a position. Just, things worth protecting. People worth protecting. He looked at Zephyron and felt the lineage pulse in his chest, the 12,000-year-old dispersed will that had found the right shape and crystallized, and he understood it now, fully, in this moment, standing with his wings spread in a room full of people he had chosen and who had chosen him. That's what he was looking for when he scattered. Not a weapon. Not a throne. A world where that was possible. The silence was enormous. Zephyron looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at the room, at Rias and Aquino and Raynare and Seraphol and Azazel and all of them, the coalition that had assembled in 8 days around a boy from another world, and something happened in his ancient face that was neither the predator's smile nor the certainty of the old order. It looked, Izuku thought, like grief. He found it then, Zephyron said softly. In you. A pause. He actually found it. Yes, Izuku said. The 10 wings closed. Not folded, closed, pulling in on themselves, the enormous presence contracting, and Izuku understood what was happening before anyone else did and said, very quickly, to the room, don't move. Don't attack. Zephyron looked at him one last time. You're going to have to hold it, he said. What he wanted. The world won't let you just have it. You'll have to hold it every day. I know, Izuku said. That's what protecting things means. The ancient entity exhaled. And with the exhale, the presence began to dissipate, not fleeing, not retreating, but genuinely releasing, the 12th-century accumulation of patience and hunger and grief letting go in the way that can only happen when something finally understands the thing it's been trying to understand. The altered light normalized. The temperature came back. The wind stopped. And in the place where Zephyron had stood, there was nothing, and in Izuku's chest, the lineage resonance pulsed once, deep and clean and enormous, and settled into a frequency that felt, for the first time, entirely like itself. The room was very quiet for a full 30 seconds. Then Seraphol said, well, and picked up her coffee. Rias let out a breath she'd been holding and looked at the ceiling briefly before bringing her gaze back down, and when she looked at Izuku it was the most unmanaged expression he'd seen from her, stripped of every layer of diplomatic architecture, just her, looking at him with something that was done pretending to be anything other than what it was. Griselda Quarta was staring at the empty space where Zephyron had stood and then at Izuku, and she said, in a voice that had entirely lost its formal composure, he just, let go. A cadre-level entity. Just, he understood something, Izuku said. That was all he needed. That's not how these situations resolve, Griselda said. Most situations don't, he agreed. This one did. Azazel, from his seat, was looking at Izuku with the expression of someone who has just watched their most significant professional calculation prove correct and feels something more personal about it than they'd expected to. He said nothing. He didn't need to. Raynare crossed the room to Izuku. She crossed it with purpose and she stopped in front of him and looked at him with a directness that had nothing left in it of professional distance. You said a mechanism doesn't wonder, she said. Yes. I've been wondering, she said, for a very long time. Long before you arrived. Her voice was steady and real. I just didn't know what I was wondering about. And now, he said. Now I think I know, she said, and the honesty in it was the bone-healed right, not the old wrong thing, but something that had been given the right conditions and had grown correctly, quietly, in the space where trust had been built from nothing over 8 days that had been more real than years had been before. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he folded his wings and the green lightning went quiet and he said, good, in the same register she'd used on the rooftop, warm and specific and meaning everything it meant. Behind them, Rias was pulling herself back together with visible intention and doing it with the particular grace of someone who has decided to stop managing something and let it be real, and when Izuku turned she met his eyes and said, you said after the summit. The summit's not over, he said. Close enough, she said. He almost laughed. We still need to sign the documents. Sign the documents, she said, and then we talk. Properly. Her chin lifted slightly, the composed surface, but transparent now, no longer a barrier. I have several things I've been waiting to say. So do I, he said. I know, she said, with the particular quality of someone who is very good at reading situations and has been reading this one for 8 days. I've known for a while. From the corner, Akino watched them both with warm golden eyes and a smile that was genuine and generous and entirely without jealousy. She knew what she felt and she'd made her peace with what that meant and what it didn't mean, and the warmth of it was its own kind of clarity. When Izuku caught her eye she smiled directly at him and he felt the fallen blood resonance like a warm current and returned the look with the specific recognition of someone who sees a person fully. Sarah Fall had finished her coffee and was watching all of it with the expression of someone who has just seen a century of diplomatic intractability resolved in 40 minutes and is deciding how she feels about that. I'm writing the most interesting report of my career tonight, she announced to nobody in particular. Please don't describe my personal conversations, Rias said. I would never, Sarah Fall said, in the tone of someone who absolutely would. They signed the documents at noon. The Trifaction Accord, for signatures, for seals, the 8th Circle Throne's mark alongside Angel, Devil, and Fallen, was witnessed by Rosweiss, who confirmed every procedural element with the focused satisfaction of someone whose professional gift had finally been fully used. Griselda Quarta signed for the Angel faction with a steadiness that suggested she had made her decision in the room when Zephyron had come and gone without the catastrophe the church's worst-case briefings had projected. After the signatures, after the formal close of session, after Rosweiss' procedural confirmation and the individual faction responses to the Accord's transmission to their respective leadership structures, the room cleared gradually. The Seraphs departed with the particular formal precision of entities who had participated in something unprecedented and were processing that fact internally. Sona Citri gave Rias a look on her way out that conveyed approximately 300 words in 2 seconds. Sarah Fall hugged Izuku, which he hadn't expected, and said into his shoulder, "You did good, kid. Don't let anyone tell you different." She patted his back and let go and looked at him with the genuine warmth of someone who means exactly what they say. "I'm going to be very annoying about this for the next decade. I look forward to it," he said honestly. She went, and the room emptied further, and eventually it was the people it had always been going to come down to, the ones who had been on the rooftop, who had walked the festival grounds, who had stood in the industrial district and on the training courtyard and in the alley where it had all begun. Azazel left last of the senior figures, pausing at the door to look at Izuku for a moment. "I'm taking the weekend," he said. "I suggest you do the same." "I'll think about it," Izuku said. "Don't think about it. Do it." He paused. "The accord is signed. The coalition is formal. The third player resolved itself in a manner I've described in my report as unexpected diplomatic disengagement, which is accurate if not complete." He looked at Izuku. "You've been running at full capacity for 8 days. The lineage is stable. The world is not currently on fire." A pause. "Rest." "Azazel," Izuku said. "What?" "Thank you." For the first night. For the book. He paused. For trusting the lineage when it was in an extremely uncertain form. Azazel looked at him for a moment. The researcher's expression, the Governor-General's composure, both of them present and both of them containing something more personal. The lineage picked well, he said. I was just the librarian. He went out, and the door closed, and the estate hall was quiet with late morning light coming through the high windows and the four of them remaining. Raynare was by the east wall. Aquino was near the table. Rias was by the window, the accord documents in her hand, and she set them on the table and turned. You said you had things to say, she said to Izuku. To me. I did, he said. So did I, she said. Would you like to go first or should I? You, he said. She looked at him with those direct blue-green eyes, the light from the high windows warm on her crimson hair, and she said, I've been managing my feelings about you since the first meeting. I'm very good at managing things. She held his gaze. I'm choosing not to do that anymore. You told me the power amplifies what's there, not what isn't. She paused. This has been here since the first meeting. Yes, he said. You knew. I noticed, he said. Same as you noticed with me. We were both managing it. Were you managing it? Very carefully, he said, with the particular honesty that had been the consistent thing between them from the beginning. She exhaled, and the last of the managed composure went with it, not abandoned, not discarded, just put down voluntarily, and what was underneath it was Rias Gremory entirely, warm and intelligent and genuine and a little fierce about it, the way people are when they feel something real and don't want to pretend otherwise. She crossed the room and stood in front of him and said, okay, which was not romantic in any formal sense and was exactly right. Okay, he agreed. Behind them, at the table, Aquino smiled at Raynare, who looked back at her with an expression that had been in transit for 8 days and had arrived somewhere. He's going to be very bad at having free time, Aquino said. He's going to make a schedule, Raynare said. For the free time. Divided into operational segments with measurable outcomes. Are you going to let him? Raynare looked at Izuku and Rias, then back at Aquino. Something in her expression was warm in the particular way of things that have been cold for a long time and are learning what warmth does to them. No, she said. Absolutely not. Aquino laughed. It was a good sound in the quiet of the old estate, real and warm and without any of the performative layers she usually kept it wrapped in. She turned to Raynare fully and her expression was the open generous one, and she said, he's going to need us both to prevent the schedule from happening. Then we'd better agree on the approach, Raynare said. Does that mean we're, Aquino tilted her head. It means, Raynare said carefully, that some things are still in process and I don't make declarations about things that are still in process. She paused. But yes. Yes, Aquino agreed. That evening, Izuku stood on the estate's outer terrace with his wings fully extended for the first time since the summit, all 12 of them, spread wide in the cooling air, the green lightning running clean and steady, the lineage resonance at its full settled frequency. The valley below was going golden in the late afternoon and the sky above it was clear and cold and enormous. They were all there. Not arranged, not organized, just present, the way people are present at the end of something significant. Rias on his left, close enough that he could feel her warmth without touching. Raynare on his right, wings slightly open in the cold air, the professional distance gone and something quieter and more real in its place. Aquino just behind his right shoulder, her fallen blood resonance a warm consistent hum against the lineage, her presence steady and genuine. Behind them, visible through the terrace door, Sarah Fall on the phone being loudly enthusiastic about something. Rossweiss reviewing the signed documents with a soft expression of deep professional satisfaction. Asia and Zenobia sitting together, Asia showing Zenobia something on her phone, Zenobia looking at it with the careful expression she brought to all new information. Somewhere in the estate, Azazel's presence, distant, comfortable, leaving them to it. The world was not fixed. The old Satan faction's coordination structure still existed. The three-faction accord was a beginning, not an ending. There were things Izuku didn't know about this world yet, gaps in the intelligence picture, uncertainties in the lineage's full scope that would take years to understand. There was a home he'd come from that he didn't know how to return to and wasn't sure, anymore, what return would mean. But the valley was golden and the sky was clear, and behind him were people who had been strangers 8 days ago and were not strangers anymore, and the lineage resonance in his chest was settled and real and entirely his own. "What are you thinking?" Rias asked. "That Azazel told me to rest this weekend," he said, "and I'm going to have to figure out what that means." She looked at him sideways. "It means not planning anything." "For how long?" "The whole weekend." He was quiet for a moment. "That seems, Midoriya," she said. "Yes." "Stop," she said, warmly. He stopped. Raynare made a sound that was entirely a laugh this time, not suppressed, not managed, just real, pulled out of her by the evening air and the moment and the ongoing comedy of who he was. She covered it with one hand but not completely and didn't try very hard. Akino's hand found his shoulder, light and warm. "We'll teach you," she said. "How to rest. It's not complicated." "It's very complicated," he said honestly. "For you specifically," Raynare agreed. "Extremely complicated. Which is why it requires assistance." He looked at the valley. The sun was going and the first stars were starting, the sky doing its ordinary astronomical work above everything. His wings moved slightly in the evening air, not flying, just present, just feeling the world they were in. In another world, somewhere across the dimensional dark, someone he'd called All Might was probably sitting in a small house watching television and smiling that rare smile of his. Somewhere, his mother was probably worrying, because she always worried, and that worrying was its own kind of love. Somewhere, the people he'd grown up with were doing the ongoing work of being themselves in the world they'd been given. He held all of that at a specific distance. Close enough to feel. Far enough to function. The way you hold things that matter when the immediate world also matters and requires your presence in it. "Hey," Rias said, and she turned to look at him directly, and her expression was the one he'd come to know as the real one, direct and warm and without the managed architecture. "You're somewhere else." "Just for a moment," he said. "Come back," she said. He looked at her. At Raynare. At Akino behind him. At the estate and everyone in it and the valley going gold below them and the sky going dark above them. "I'm here," he said. And he was. Fully, completely, with all 12 wings spread in the evening air and the green lightning running steady and the lineage settled in his chest like something that had finally found the shape it had been looking for across all that dimensional dark in 12,000 years of waiting. He was here. The valley held the last of the daylight. The stars came out one by one. Behind him, the estate was warm and full of people who had chosen this, each of them separately, and the choices had made something real. The wings caught the last light and held it for a moment before the dark came in full. Then the dark came in, and it was the good kind, the kind that follows a day that mattered, the kind that means tomorrow is coming, the kind that every light looks better inside. Izuku Midoriya, fallen king of the Eighth Circle, stood on the terrace in the dark with his court around him and his wings folded quiet and his chest full of something the lineage had been carrying across 12,000 years and all of creation looking for exactly this shape to hold it. He had found it. So had it. They were both, in the end, exactly where they needed to be.